Before we start, make sure you're warm, safe, and settled. No need to stay awake. This is your permission to doze off. We'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop a comment if you'd like to share. The stench of sweat, blood, and raw ambition hangs thick in the air. You're in ancient Rome, where gladiators are the rock stars of the day, without the groupies or the chart-topping hits. But let's be clear, this isn't some glamorous life of fame and fortune. It's more like a cutthroat reality show, where losing could mean literally losing your head. You might think of gladiatorial combat as just a bunch of guys hitting each other with swords for fun, right? Wrong. It's more like an elaborate, deadly dance choreographed by the economic and political machinations of Rome. Think of it as the ultimate pay-per-view event, sponsored not by brands, but by emperors and politicians looking to win over the masses. The Colosseum wasn't just a battleground, it was a stage for power plays and public relations stunts. Now, let's talk numbers. Hosting a gladiatorial event was no budget-friendly affair. We're talking about thousands of sesterces, a Roman currency that might have felt like monopoly money, but was very real in its economic power. The games were a colossal financial drain, with some estimates suggesting costs equivalent to millions of today's dollars. And why not? You had to pay for the venue, the fighters, the elaborate sets and, of course, the lions. Because what's a gladiator fight without a few ferocious animals to spice things up? But why spend so much on a bloodbath? Well, the games weren't just about entertainment, they were a political tool. If you were a senator or an emperor, throwing a lavish spectacle could boost your popularity faster than a viral TikTok. Julius Caesar, for example, was famed for his extravagant games, which he used to curry favor with the public. It was the ancient equivalent of shaking hands and kissing babies, but with more swords and fewer hygiene concerns. Behind the scenes, gladiator schools were the heart of this brutal business. These were the training grounds where slaves, prisoners of war, and sometimes even volunteers learned the art of combat. Surprised that someone would volunteer for such a grim fate? Well, some did, lured by the promise of fame, fortune, or at least 3 square meals a day. The schools, or ludi, were run by a lanista, a manager who was part coach, part business mogul. Think of him as the Don King of the ancient world, minus the hair. These schools were not just factories of death, they were highly organized enterprises. Gladiators were investments, and a smart lanista knew how to protect his assets. This meant rigorous training, careful diet plans, and even medical care. That's right, they had their own version of sports medicine. A healthy gladiator was a profitable gladiator after all. And if they survived long enough, some could even earn their freedom. Talk about an incentive to dodge that sword thrust, but let's not gloss over the grim reality. For every tale of a gladiator who fought his way to freedom, there were countless others who ended up as fodder for the beasts, or as the star attraction in a particularly gruesome execution. The life of a gladiator was nasty, brutish, and often short. Yet the allure of the arena was undeniable, fueled by stories of epic battles and heroic feats. It's the same reason we're drawn to action movies today, though our heroes generally have better odds of survival. The games themselves were a spectacle of blood and theatre. The Colosseum, Rome's grand amphitheatre, could hold up to 50,000 spectators. That's like a packed modern sports stadium, minus the nachos and halftime shows. The audience came for the thrill, the violence, and the drama. The fights were often accompanied by grand narratives, turning the gladiators into characters in a live-action drama. It wasn't just about who could swing the hardest, it was about who could put on the best show. But here's a twist, not all battles were to the death. That's one of those myths that Hollywood loves. Sure, fatalities happened more often than not, but many fights ended with one gladiator conceding defeat. The crowd, or sometimes the sponsor of the games, would decide the loser's fate. If the defeated fighter had put on a good show, he might be spared. If not, well, better luck in the next life. All this might sound like a grim precursor to modern sports, but it was also a reflection of Roman society, its values, its politics, and its economy. The games were a way to control and entertain the masses, a tool for social cohesion and distraction. They were bred in circuses, with the bread sometimes being literal, and the circuses decidedly less family-friendly. So, while the idea of gladiators might conjure up images of heroic battles and noble warriors, the truth was often more brutal. The arena was a place where the lines between life and death blurred, where economics and politics dictated who lived and who died. It was a world where you wouldn't last a day. Not because you lacked the courage, but because the odds were never in your favor. And as you stand there, taking it all in, you realize that surviving as a gladiator was about more than just skill with a sword. It was about navigating the dangerous currents of Roman society, a feat as daunting as any battle in the arena. Speaking of navigating deadly currents, let's dive into the gladiator boot camp, the Ludus. Picture it as the original CrossFit gym, minus the Instagram posts but with a few more scars. Here, you're not just tossed into a pit with a sword, there's a whole preparation process, akin to a soldier's training, but with harsher odds and a lot more at stake. Your first stop at the Ludus would be the doctors, the trainers. Forget about personal trainers with motivational mantras. These guys were more like drill sergeants, complete with a penchant for discipline and an aversion to excuses. Each doctor specialized in a particular fighting style, like the heavily armed Cicuta or the nimble Retiarius. They'd mold you into a fighter who knew your way around a blade or net, depending on your assigned style. Think of it as a deadly dance class. Only the wrong step could cost you more than a sprained ankle. Training wasn't just about swinging swords willy-nilly. It was regimented, precise, and exhausting. Sessions could last all day, pushing you to the brink of collapse. Forget protein shakes, your recovery drink was plain water, and you were lucky if it wasn't tepid. Gladiators trained with rudies, wooden swords heavier than their real counterparts. Why? So when you switched to the real deal, it felt like slicing through air. It's a psychological trick that modern athletes can appreciate, except here, the stakes were a head shorter. And let's talk about diet. Today's professional athletes might have their kale smoothies and quinoa salads, but ancient gladiators had their own version of clean eating. They were nicknamed horderii, or barley men, not because they were brewing craft beer, but because their diet consisted heavily of barley and beans. Packed with carbs and protein, it was the kind of meal plan that modern nutritionists might nod approvingly at if they could overlook the lack of variety. The goal was to build a layer of fat, not for aesthetic reasons, but because a bit of extra cushion could mean the difference between a shallow cut and a fatal one. Safety first, right? Living conditions in the Ludus were another story. Imagine a dormitory-style setup, but instead of college antics, you had the constant hum of impending doom. Gladiators lived in small cells, a far cry from the lavish lifestyles of Roman elites. Privacy was a foreign concept, and camaraderie was forged in the fires of shared hardship. Forget about a good night's sleep. Your dreams were likely haunted by the roar of the crowd and the flash of steel. Yet, despite the grim surroundings, the Ludus was a crucible of sorts. Bonds formed over shared meals and the relentless grind of training. It's a tale as old as time. Adversity makes strange bedfellows. The camaraderie among gladiators was a double-edged sword, building a sense of unity even as they trained to face each other in the arena. It was a world where your best friend today could be your opponent tomorrow, a reality that would make any soap opera plot seem tame by comparison. For many, the Ludus was both prison and sanctuary. Here, you were valued for your potential, not your past. Gladiators might have been slaves or prisoners, but within these walls, they were warriors in training. It was a brutal meritocracy, where skill and strength could elevate you above your station, at least temporarily. And while some might have been coerced into this life, others chose it willingly, seduced by the prospect of glory and the distant hope of freedom. Despite the harsh conditions, there was a method to the madness. Gladiators weren't just fighters, they were performers, and the Ludus was their stagecraft school. Here, you learned not only how to fight, but how to captivate an audience, to turn combat into spectacle. Each move was calculated, each fight a choreography of life and death. The best gladiators were those who could work the crowd, turning the tide of battle with a well-timed flourish or a dramatic pause. The lanista, the manager of the Ludus, played a crucial role in this theatre of war. A shrewd businessman, he knew how to market his fighters, transforming them into stars whose stories captivated the Roman imagination. The lanista's job was part talent scout, part promoter, and all about maximizing profits. He bet on his fighters like stocks in the Colosseum marketplace, and a successful gladiator could make him a small fortune. Yet, this was no fairy tale. The reality was that most gladiators lived with the constant spectre of death hanging over them. For every champion who earned his freedom, countless others fell in the arena, their stories untold and uncelebrated. It was a life of contradictions, where hope and despair walked hand in hand. You could train for years perfecting your craft, but a single misstep could end your career and your life. So, as you stand among the ranks of these ancient warriors, you realize that the life of a gladiator was an intricate dance of survival, performance, and raw human will. It was a world where the odds were stacked against you, where each day was a fight to see tomorrow. And while the romantic allure of the gladiator persists, the true story is one of grit and resilience, a testament to the enduring human spirit in the face of impossible odds. So, you're suited up and ready to strut your stuff in the Roman Colosseum. You might think stepping into the arena is like entering a modern-day sports stadium, but with less popcorn and more peril. Sorry to burst your bubble, but the reality is both more complex and less glamorous than Hollywood's battle-scarred fantasies. First off, let's talk about the tools of your trade. Forget the shiny uniform weapons you see in movies. Gladiators wielded a dizzying array of arms, each suited to different fighting styles. Swords like the gladius, from which they got their name, were short and deadly. But there were also tridents for the net-wielding retiarius, broad shields for the secutor, and even curved blades for the thraex. The arsenal was as varied as a modern-day sports store, minus the customer service. And here's the kicker. These weapons weren't just for show. The choice of gear wasn't about personal preference, but rather about strategy and spectacle. The aim was to pit fighters with contrasting styles against each other, creating a visual and tactical feast for the crowd. Think of it as a macabre chess game, where the pieces are men and the stakes are life or death. It's not just about the kill, it's about the drama of the dance. Now, the crowd. Oh, the crowd. If you think modern fans are passionate, you haven't met a Roman audience. These folks were the original superfans, and their cheers or jeers could seal your fate. But let's debunk the myth of the thumb. Contrary to popular belief, it wasn't always a simple thumbs-up or thumbs-down situation. The signals were more nuanced, with gestures like a closed fist or a waving hand indicating whether they prefer to see you live to fight another day or become an impromptu snack for the lions. The crowd was a critical player in the arena's social choreography. Imagine 50,000 spectators, each with their own opinions, ranging from noble senators to common plebs. Their collective voice was a barometer of public sentiment, a reflection of societal values and tensions. When the crowd roared for blood, it wasn't just the thrill of violence, but a complex interplay of emotions, politics, and power. A victorious gladiator might win the hearts of the masses, but a perceived injustice could spark outrage or even riot. The Roman audience was as much a part of the performance as the fighters themselves. And speaking of performance, let's introduce the emperors, the ultimate ringmasters of this deadly circus. These guys weren't just figureheads, they were actively involved in the games, using them as a political tool. A well-staged gladiatorial event could curry favor with the populace or distract from political scandals. Emperors like Augustus and Trajan were patrons of the games, understanding their power to sway public opinion. They were the original spin doctors, crafting narratives through blood and spectacle. Take Emperor Commodus, for instance, who fancied himself a gladiator and reportedly fought in the arena. But don't be fooled by tales of his prowess. His fights were carefully staged, ensuring victory without the risk of actual harm. It was less about bravery and more about ego-stroking. Commodus used the games to project strength and connect with the people, but the whole charade was about as genuine as reality TV drama. The games were also a stage for political maneuvering. If you were a senator, sponsoring a gladiatorial event was akin to hosting a lavish fundraiser. It was a chance to showcase wealth, curry favor, and perhaps gain a few votes. But gladiators were pawns in a much larger game, their fates tied to the whims of those in power. And while the emperors might have held the metaphorical remote control, the crowd's reaction was the ultimate review, able to make or break a political career. But let's not forget the gladiators themselves. Stepping into the arena, you weren't just a warrior, you were an entertainer. The best fighters knew how to work the crowd, turning a potentially lethal duel into a captivating show. Theatrics and flair were as crucial as combat skills. A well-timed taunt or a dramatic flourish could turn the tide of battle and win the crowd's favor. Yet, despite all the drama and spectacle, the reality was often grim. The arena was a brutal meritocracy where skill and charisma could elevate you, but a single misstep could spell disaster. For every gladiator who tasted victory, countless others fell, their stories lost to history's shadows. So, as you stand there, the roar of the crowd echoing in your ears, you realize that surviving as a gladiator was about more than just fighting. It was about navigating the complex social choreography of the arena, a place where life and death were decided not just by skill, but by the whims of the crowd and the machinations of those in power. It was a performance art of the highest stakes, a testament to the enduring human fascination with the edge of survival. And as you prepare to face your opponent, you understand that the true battle is as much against fate as it is against your fellow fighter. So, there you are, basking in the afterglow of a hard-won victory, the crowd's roar still echoing in your ears like a rock concert encore. You might think that surviving the arena means the hard part is over, but hold on to your laurel wreath. It's not all celebratory feasts and glamorous retirements. Welcome to the gritty aftermath of gladiatorial combat, where reality hits you harder than any opponent ever could. First, let's talk injuries. We're not just talking about a few scratches and bruises, we're talking about wounds that would make modern ER doctors cringe. Remember, this is ancient Rome, where medical care was more art than science. If you were lucky, you'd have access to a medicus, a physician trained in patching up human piñatas like yourself. But let's not sugarcoat it. These guys were working with tools that wouldn't look out of place in a medieval torture chamber. Sutures were made from catgut, and antiseptics were basically non-existent. Forget about MRIs or X-rays, diagnosis was often a game of educated guesses. And yet, some doctors were surprisingly skilled, relying on herbal remedies and surgical techniques that were ahead of their time. Galen, for instance, was a physician who treated gladiators and went on to become one of the most celebrated medical minds of antiquity. But for every Galen, there were countless other practitioners whose methods were, shall we say, less than reassuring. The psychological aftermath of the arena was no picnic either. Think about it, 1 minute you're fighting for your life, the next you're trying to process the trauma of combat. PTSD may be a modern term, but the psychological scars were just as real back then. Surviving the arena meant grappling with the mental toll of violence, a struggle that could haunt a gladiator long after the wounds had healed. Now, let's pivot to the topic of social mobility. Surviving a match didn't just mean you lived to fight another day, it could also mean a step up the social ladder. In a society as rigidly hierarchical as Rome, gladiators were a peculiar exception to the rule. If you were particularly skilled or lucky enough to survive multiple battles, you might earn your freedom. This wasn't just a pipe dream, it happened often enough to give hope to those who dared to dream of life beyond the arena. Freed gladiators, known as auctorati, could even achieve a degree of fame and fortune. Some became trainers, leveraging their hard-won skills to teach the next generation of fighters. Others capitalized on their notoriety to secure sponsorships or endorsements. Yes, you heard that right, endorsements in ancient Rome. Imagine a former gladiator's face on amphorae promoting olive oil or wine. It's the ancient equivalent of a modern athlete landing a sneaker deal. But before you get too swept up in the romance, remember that not all gladiators rode into the sunset. The reality was much grimmer for most. Many remained slaves, bound by contracts that prioritized profit over people. Even those who earned their freedom faced significant hurdles. Prejudice didn't vanish overnight, and being a former gladiator carried its own set of stigmas. Society might cheer your victories, but it wasn't quite ready to welcome you into the fold with open arms. And let's not forget the financial aspect. Gladiators who managed to save their earnings could potentially buy a small plot of land or start a modest business. But saving was easier said than done, especially when your career was as unstable as a Roman chariot on a cobblestone street. The cost of living in Rome wasn't exactly peanuts, and the economic divide was as wide as the Colosseum itself. While the thought of a gladiator's retirement might conjure images of a peaceful countryside retreat, the truth was often a stark contrast. Many continued to fight well past their prime, driven by necessity or the lure of the arena's siren call. The games were addictive, a toxic mix of adrenaline, fame, and the ever-present possibility of death. Walking away wasn't as simple as it seemed. The arena had a way of pulling you back in, even as it chewed you up and spat you out. So, as you contemplate the life of a gladiator, remember that survival was just the beginning of a different kind of battle. It wasn't just about wielding a sword, it was about navigating the treacherous waters of Roman society, where every victory came with its own set of challenges. The reality of gladiatorial life was a complex tapestry of triumphs and trials, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of insurmountable odds. And with that, we've scratched the surface of what it truly meant to be a gladiator. Not just a fighter, but a survivor in a world where the stakes were as high as the expectations. As we continue to delve into this ancient spectacle, keep in mind the duality of myth and reality, where every glamorous tale hides a gritty truth waiting to be uncovered. So, we've trawled through the bloody dust of the Colosseum, savoured the bittersweet taste of gladiatorial fame, and peeked behind the curtains of Rome's most notorious spectacle. Yet, the tale of the gladiators doesn't end with the clashing of swords or the hush of the arena's dying echoes. Oh no, the legacy they've left is as enduring as the Roman Empire's ruins themselves. And boy does it have layers, like a historical lasagna, minus the cheesy Hollywood glamour. First, let's shatter the romanticized glass of the gladiator myth. Sure, pop culture loves to paint these fighters as noble warriors, stoic and unyielding, battling for honor and glory. But the truth? They were more like pawns in an imperial game of life or death chess. Their lives were dictated not by chivalry, but by the economic and social whims of Rome. However, the allure of these fighters wasn't entirely misplaced. They became symbols of strength and resilience, embodying the human spirit's gritty determination to rise above adversity. In a society that valued spectacle over substance, gladiators were the ultimate entertainers, alive, dead, or somewhere in between. Now, let's talk about the gladiators' unexpected influence on modern sports. Ever been to a football game and wondered why the crowd goes wild at a perfectly executed tackle? Well, thank the Romans for that. The gladiatorial games were the original spectator sports, complete with fans, chants, and even merchandise. The frenzied energy of a modern stadium is a faint echo of the Colosseum's roaring crowd. Today's athletes, much like the gladiators of old, are larger-than-life figures, their triumphs and defeats broadcast to millions. Just swap out the swords for sneakers, and you've got a legacy that spans millennia. But it's not just sports that owe a nod to the gladiators. The sheer spectacle of the games has influenced everything from theatre to cinema. If you've ever watched an action-packed blockbuster and felt your heart race at the climactic showdown, you can thank the Roman penchant for high-stakes drama. Gladiatorial combat was theatre in its rawest form, a blend of blood and performance that captured the imagination and the coins of an empire. It's no wonder that directors and playwrights have borrowed liberally from this well of inspiration, crafting narratives that echo the tension and thrill of the ancient arena. Let's pivot to the surprising reverence these fighters commanded in Roman society. For men often considered the lowest of the low slaves, prisoners, outsiders, gladiators garnered a peculiar kind of respect. They were the rock stars of their time, celebrated for their skill and bravery. Poets wrote verses about them, and their likenesses adorned everything from mosaics to oil lamps. Think of them as the ancient world's celebrity influencers, minus the Instagram filters. But here's the kicker, even emperors, the most powerful men in Rome, sometimes sought to align themselves with the gladiators' raw appeal. It was a shrewd political move, a way to connect with the masses by embracing the very symbols of strength and courage they idolized. Yet, despite this admiration, gladiators remained outsiders, forever tainted by their violent profession. It was a paradox. Their popularity didn't translate into true acceptance. The Romans loved their champions but didn't necessarily want them as neighbours. The societal barriers were as unyielding as the stone walls of the Colosseum itself, a testament to the rigid class divisions that defined Roman life. As we unravel the gladiatorial legacy, it's clear why this brutal chapter of history still captivates us. It's a story of contrasts of courage and cruelty, of triumph and tragedy. The gladiators were more than mere combatants. They were symbols of the human condition, reflecting the best and worst of what society could offer. Their allure lies in their complexity, in the way they challenge us to confront our own fascination with violence and spectacle. But let's be honest, would you really want to swap your modern-day comforts for a life in the arena? Picture this. A career path where job security is a literal fight for survival, where your next promotion might involve a trident to the gut. Sure, the appeal of fame and glory is tempting, but let's not romanticize it beyond reason. Today, you might grapple with office politics or the odd IT glitch, but at least your performance reviews don't come with a death sentence. So, as we wrap up our journey through the dust and drama of gladiatorial Rome, take a moment to appreciate the legacy these fighters have left behind. They remind us of the resilience of the human spirit, the allure of spectacle, and the power of storytelling. In a world where we still grapple with the balance between entertainment and ethics, the gladiator's tale remains as relevant as ever. It's a history lesson written in blood and sweat, a narrative that continues to inspire and caution in equal measure. And as you close this chapter, remember, the past may be ancient, but its echoes are surprisingly modern. In the haze of Mesoamerican jungles, well over 2,000 years ago, the Mayans were busy perfecting what we'd now call the original farm-to-apothecary pipeline. These folks took the term going green to a whole new level, brewing herbal concoctions that make our modern-day wellness smoothies look like amateur hour. You see, the Mayans were the OGs of herbal medicine, and they didn't just dabble in it, they lived it. Their knowledge was like a cherished family recipe, passed down from generation to generation, each adding their own secret ingredient. And by ingredient, I mean extensive knowledge of over 1,000 plant species. Talk about a gardening commitment. These weren't just your backyard daisies either. We're talking about heavyweights like cacao and copal. Yes, cacao. Our beloved source of chocolate is not just for sweet-toothed indulgence, but was once a sacred plant with its own PR team, promoting health benefits long before Instagram influencers caught on. Let's start with cacao, because, let's be honest, chocolate is the one thing we can all agree on. The Mayans were the first to turn this into a drink, and not just any drink, a frothy, bitter concoction laced with chili and spices. They called it the food of the gods, and they weren't kidding. Rich in antioxidants, this was their go-to for everything from boosting energy to, dare I say, a mood enhancer, probably because it tasted better than anything else on the menu. They didn't have the luxury of a double-shot macchiato, but cacao was a close second. Then there's copal, the Mayan version of Febreze, but with a spiritual twist. This tree resin was burned as incense in religious ceremonies, and its smoke was believed to purify the soul. Copal was so integral to their culture that it was practically a currency. If you think your scented candle set a vibe, the Mayans had you beat by a couple of millennia with their copal-infused meditation sessions. But let's not romanticize this too much. Before you start wishing for a time machine, remember that these early forays into herbal medicine weren't all sunshine and cacao pods. While the Mayans were undoubtedly advanced, they didn't have modern medicine's luxury of clinical trials or pesky things like FDA approval. Theirs was a world where trial and error could mean the difference between a successful cure and, well, a less than pleasant outing. This knowledge was often entrusted to shamans, the Mayan equivalent of the local pharmacist, if your pharmacist could also chat with the spirit world. Shamans were the keepers of this botanical wisdom, doling out remedies and, let's face it, probably a fair amount of guesswork. No pressure or anything, but one wrong leaf, and you might be having a very different kind of spiritual experience. Despite the obvious lack of Wi-Fi and modern amenities, the Mayans were ahead of their time, creating a network of trade routes that rivaled modern supply chains. Their herbal knowledge spread far and wide, influencing neighboring cultures and even catching the attention of European explorers. These explorers eventually carted off not just gold, but also this botanical treasure trove back to the old world, forever changing the landscape of medicine. So, the next time you sip on your artisanal herbal tea, give a nod to the ancient Mayans. After all, they were the ones who first brewed up the idea that plants could heal. Their legacy is a testament to human ingenuity, a reminder that even in the dense jungles of history, there's always room for a little natural wellness, with or without the Instagram filter. So, while you're sipping that artisanal herbal tea, let's dig into the Mayans' sophisticated world of trade networks and economic strategies that would put today's business majors to shame. Imagine a Mesoamerican Silk Road, if you will, minus the camels but with a lot more jaguars and cacao beans. The Mayans were not just herbal enthusiasts. They were economic powerhouses who understood that a thriving trade network was as essential as rain to their maize fields. Trade wasn't just about swapping goods, it was the lifeblood of Mayan society. Picture bustling market centers like Tikal or Kapam, where merchants haggled over everything from salt and obsidian to the star of our show herbs. The Mayans had a trade network stretching over 500 miles, connecting city-states like a web of ancient LinkedIn connections, each node buzzing with the exchange of goods, ideas, and, let's face it, probably some juicy gossip. These trade routes were the arteries through which the knowledge of plants flowed. It was through these pathways that the secrets of herbal medicine spread, reaching far-flung corners and influencing cultures across Mesoamerica. The role of trade in disseminating this knowledge is a testament to the Mayans' savvy in both commerce and healthcare. They understood that knowledge was as valuable as the herbs themselves, and they weren't shy about sharing or selling it. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't some utopian barter system where everyone sang kumbaya over a cup of copal tea. The Mayan economy was as cutthroat as any Wall Street trading floor. Markets were competitive, and merchants were strategic, often forming alliances to dominate trade routes. They knew that controlling the flow of goods meant controlling power, and they were more than willing to play the game. And what a game it was. The Mayans had a knack for marketing that would make Don Draper proud. Take cacao, for instance. This wasn't just a tasty treat, it was currency, literally. They used cacao beans as money, a practice so prevalent that if you had enough beans, you could practically buy your way into the afterlife. It's like if your morning espresso shot were accepted at your local ATM. Now that's what I call a liquid asset. But it wasn't just about the beans. The Mayans were masters at creating demand where there was none. They spun tales of the mystical properties of their herbs, elevating them from mere plants to sacred commodities. If you think modern marketing is clever, just remember, the Mayans made a business out of burning tree resin. That's right, copal wasn't just incense, it was a spiritual necessity, a must-have for any respectable ceremony, and a product placement deal that even the gods couldn't refuse. Of course, with great power comes great responsibility, or great drama, depending on how you look at it. The control of trade routes was a source of conflict, with city-states vying for dominance. This wasn't just about who had the best herbs, it was about who had the best connections. Alliances were formed and broken, battles were fought, and leaders were overthrown, all in the name of controlling the flow of precious goods. Yet, in this complex dance of commerce and conflict, the Mayans managed to maintain a balance that allowed their civilization to thrive for centuries. Their trade networks were not just economic constructs, they were social networks, binding communities together and facilitating the exchange of culture and knowledge. In this sense, the Mayans were visionaries, understanding that the key to a prosperous society lay in the free flow of ideas as much as in the flow of goods. This economic savvy extended to their understanding of social structures. The Mayans knew that a well-fed, well-informed populace was a content one. Herbal medicine played a crucial role here, not just as a health solution, but as a social equalizer. Remedies were available to everyone, from the high priest to the lowliest farmer, ensuring a level of public health that supported their complex society. However, let's not paint too rosy a picture. The Mayan world was not without its disparities and dark sides. While the elite enjoyed elaborate herbal concoctions, the common folk often had to make do with whatever herbs they could forage. The economic gap was as pronounced as it is today, with the rich benefiting most from the trade networks that they controlled. And while the Mayans were brilliant, they couldn't quite solve the conundrum of equal distribution, a challenge that continues to elude us. So, as we delve deeper into the Mayan world, let's appreciate their ingenuity without losing sight of the complexities and contradictions that made their society so fascinating. They were people of their time, after all, ingenious, flawed, and utterly human. And as we continue this journey, remember, the story of Mayan herbal medicine is not just about plants. It's about the people who used them, the networks they built, and the economy that thrived on their wisdom. Stay tuned, because there's much more to uncover in this jungle of history. And speaking of the people who used these herbs, let's dive into the power players of Mayan society, the rulers and priests. Think of them as the original influencers, wielding herbal knowledge like a blue checkmark on Instagram. In a world where controlling information was as vital as controlling the cacao supply, these leaders knew that knowledge was power. And what better way to maintain power than by keeping a monopoly on the secrets of the jungle pharmacy? The Mayan rulers didn't just sit around in their palatial city-states sipping on cacao cocktails. They were deeply entwined with the spiritual and political life of their communities. Picture this. A king resplendent in jade and feathers, presiding over a grand ceremony where the air is thick with copal smoke. The ruler, acting as both a political leader and a divine intermediary, would use herbs not just for healing, but for cementing their divine right to rule. It was all about optics, folks. If you can cure the common cold with a blend of leaves and incantations, it makes you look less like a mere mortal and more like a god on earth. The priests, meanwhile, were the behind-the-scenes managers of this mystical medicine show. They were the ones who kept the herbal scrolls, metaphorically speaking, since they used codices and understood the arcane rituals that turned leaves and roots into elixirs. These priests were the gatekeepers of knowledge, and like any good gatekeeper, they knew how to play the game. By controlling access to herbal remedies, they controlled the narrative, ensuring their place at the top of the social hierarchy. It's like having the only key to the city's pharmacy and deciding who gets the good stuff. Now, while it might be tempting to romanticize these priests as wise old sages, let's add a dash of reality seasoning to this historical soup. The role of the shaman, often conflated with the priest, was not just about being a mystical healer. Shamans were practical folks who understood the nitty-gritty of herbal medicine. Sure, they might have dabbled in the spiritual side of things, who doesn't like a good chant or two, but at their core they were the early scientists of their day. They experimented, observed, and refined their craft. But, without Google Scholar to back them up, their methods could be a bit hit or miss, and boy did they have a lot riding on their shoulders. In a society where a ruler's legitimacy could hinge on their ability to keep subjects healthy and content, shamans had to deliver results. Imagine the pressure of being responsible for both the king's headaches and the peasant's stomachaches. If their herbal remedies failed, it wasn't just a bad Yelp review they were risking, it was their entire career, and sometimes their heads. The interweaving of herbal medicine with religion and politics was a masterstroke of Mayan society. It was the perfect way to ensure that the populace remained loyal and obedient. After all, if you're convinced that your leader can commune with the gods through a cup of herbal tea, you're less likely to challenge their authority. It was a system that reinforced the social order, creating a society where belief in the mystical power of plants was as strong as belief in the gods themselves. But let's not forget the economic angle here. The production and distribution of herbal remedies were big business. Herbal concoctions were not just consumed locally, they were traded across city-states, making them a significant part of the Mayan economy. The rulers and priests understood this all too well. By controlling the supply and demand of these goods, they could ensure a steady flow of wealth and resources into their coffers. It's the classic supply and demand curve with a side of spiritual enlightenment. And let's give credit where it's due, these rulers and priests were marketing geniuses. They turned herbal medicine into a brand, complete with rituals and ceremonies that made every herbal remedy feel like an event. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a product launch, complete with influencers and exclusive access. By wrapping their herbal cures in layers of religious significance, they ensured that demand remained high and that their status as indispensable leaders was never questioned. Of course, like any good story, there's a twist. While the shamans and priests wielded significant power, they were also at the mercy of the very knowledge they controlled. The line between revered healer and reviled charlatan was razor-thin. A failed treatment could quickly turn the public's adulation into suspicion. Sound familiar? It's the same precarious balancing act that modern leaders face. Just swap out herbal remedies for economic policies or public health measures. This delicate dance between power, knowledge, and belief is what made the Mayan society so fascinating. It was a world where the mystical and the practical were two sides of the same cacao bean, where rulers and priests used every tool at their disposal to maintain control. And at the heart of it all was the humble herb, the linchpin of a system that kept the wheels of society turning. As we peel back the layers of this ancient society, it's clear that the Mayans were masters of their craft, adept at weaving together the threads of politics, religion, and medicine into a tapestry that supported their civilization for centuries. They understood that the power of herbs lay not just in their healing properties, but in their ability to shape and define the very fabric of their society. So, the next time you sip on that herbal concoction, take a moment to appreciate the rich history that flavors every drop. The Mayans have left us a legacy that goes far beyond the plants themselves, offering insights into the complexities of human nature and the enduring dance of power and belief. but hold on to your copal incense. There's more to explore as we continue our journey through the verdant jungles of Mayan history. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll unravel even more secrets of this fascinating civilization. As we wade further into the Mayan jungle of history, let's take a pit stop at the intersection of myth and medicine. The Mayans, ever the storytellers, knew the power of a good narrative. Not only did they have a knack for weaving tales that elevated plants from mere flora to mystical flora, but these stories also gave their herbal concoctions a sort of enchanted allure that would make a modern wellness guru swoon. Take the legend of the saber tree, for instance. In Mayan mythology, this wasn't just any tree, it was the world tree, connecting the heavens, earth, and underworld. Imagine that, a botanical version of the internet, if you will, minus the memes. The ceiba was thought to have divine properties, capable of granting protection and insight. Now, I hate to burst any mystical bubbles, but the reality was that its bark was often used to treat skin infections. Practical, yes, but not quite the spiritual Wi-Fi it was cracked up to be. And then there's the story of balshay, a fermented beverage made from the bark of the balshay tree mixed with honey and water. The Mayans believed it was a gift from the gods, specifically the god Kukulkan, who had a penchant for party planning, it seems. In truth, balshay was likely more about getting a buzz than a divine blessing, but hey, who hasn't overhyped a drink at a party before? The appeal of these stories is undeniable. Who wouldn't want to believe in the mystical powers of a plant that promises to cure ailments while connecting you to the cosmos? It's this blend of the magical and the medicinal that has kept these legends alive, even as we've traded in our herbal brews for cold-pressed juices and kombucha. Every generation, it seems, has its own version of a superfood, wrapped in a tale of ancient wisdom and eternal health. Quinoa, anyone? But let's not let the allure of these myths cloud our judgment. The Mayans were masters of using stories to enhance the reputation of their herbs, and it worked, sometimes a little too well. For instance, the herb chaya, often called Mayan spinach, was touted as everything from a cure for diabetes to a weight loss miracle. While it's undeniably nutritious, chaya also contains toxic cyanogenic glycosides. A quick boil solves that problem, but it's a reminder that even the most sacred plants come with a handle with care label. This myth-making extended beyond just health benefits. The Mayans were astute marketers, crafting narratives that elevated the mundane to the divine. Cacao, that darling of the Mayan pantry, was steeped in spiritual significance, and not just because it tasted good. It was said that consuming cacao allowed one to commune with the gods, a nifty way to ensure that this food of the gods maintained its high status and price. After all, if you're told that your morning cup of cacao is a hotline to the divine, you're likely to pay a premium for it. Yet, while the myth added a layer of allure, it also served a practical purpose. In a world where information was power, these stories were a form of control. By creating a mystique around certain herbs, the Mayan leaders could maintain their grip on both the spiritual and economic reins of their society. It's much easier to justify a high price for cacao or balshay when it's not just a drink, but a sacrament. Fast forward to today, and we see echoes of these ancient practices in our own markets. The modern wellness industry, after all, thrives on a similar blend of myth and marketing. From acai berries to turmeric lattes, there's no shortage of products promising a return to some nebulous state of pre-industrial health. And while the science often backs up the benefits, the stories we tell ourselves about these superfoods are just as potent as the nutrients they contain. It's the Mayan playbook with a modern twist, and it's working just as well now as it did then. Of course, the downside to all this myth-making is that it can overshadow the realities of the plants themselves. Take the story of the Mayan use of tobacco, which was both revered and feared. Used in rituals and as a form of currency, tobacco was a powerful tool in the shaman's kit. But while the stories touted its spiritual significance, they conveniently glossed over the health risks. Something we're all too familiar with today. The romanticism of these myths can also lead to unrealistic expectations. The Mayans, for all their wisdom, were not infallible. Their herbal remedies were the result of generations of trial and error, not divine guidance. And sometimes, despite the stories, the herbs didn't work as advertised. This is the reality of medicine, ancient or modern. It's as much about what doesn't work as what does. In dissecting these myths, we gain a deeper appreciation for the Mayans' ingenuity and the complex relationship they had with their environment. Their stories were not just about explaining the world, but about navigating it, using narrative as a tool for survival as much as a source of wonder. And while we may not need to rely on these myths today, they offer valuable lessons on the power of storytelling and its ability to shape our perceptions and our world. So, as we continue our journey through Mayan history, let's keep one foot firmly planted in the real world while allowing ourselves to be enchanted by the tales they spun. The Mayans mastered the art of blending fact and fiction, and in doing so, they left us a legacy that is as rich and complex as the jungle itself. The next time you hear about the latest superfood, remember, behind every miracle cure is a story waiting to be told, one that's often just as nourishing as the food itself. Stay tuned, because the next part of our journey will delve even deeper into the secrets of Mayan society and the incredible ways they used plants to build an empire, myths and all. As we continue our journey through the verdant jungles of Mayan history, it's time to see how their ancient herbal medicine has outlasted empires and continues to influence our world today. Just like a vintage vinyl making a comeback in a world of digital downloads, some Mayan plant-based remedies are still the beeswax in modern medicine. Let's talk about the mainstay of any Mayan apothecary, cacao. Today, we know it as the chocolate that makes our hearts skip a beat, but science finally caught up with the Mayans' intuition. Studies show that cacao is packed with flavonoids, which are like little heart-protecting warriors. So when you nibble on that dark chocolate, remember you're not just indulging, you're participating in a 2,000-year-old wellness tradition. It's like a delicious time machine, and, unlike some wellness fads, this one is backed by research. Take that, kale. Then there's the mystical leaf chaya, dubbed the Mayan miracle plant. While its legends promised it could cure everything short of a broken heart, modern science recognizes its nutritional value, particularly its high levels of protein and vitamins A and C. But beware, like every good superhero, it comes with a warning. Eat it raw, and you'll be munching on cyanide. Cooking it, however, makes it as safe as your grandma's spinach pie. It's like nature's version of a trust fall. Just make sure you follow the instructions. And let's not forget about copal, the sacred incense that Mayans used to purify the soul and, well, everything else. In today's aromatherapy circles, copal is making a comeback, touted for its calming effects. It's a little piece of Mayan spirituality that's found its way into our living rooms, proving that some traditions are just too soothing to fade away. You might not be purifying your spirit for a temple ceremony, but hey, a little relaxation never hurt anyone. The Mayans also had a thing for allspice, which they used to soothe sore muscles and even as a preservative. Fast forward to today, and we still sprinkle it on our holiday pies and use it in essential oils to relieve tension. It's as if the Mayans knew that a good muscle rub was essential for surviving both ancient conquests and modern yoga classes. Now, let's pivot from the plants themselves to the broader impact of Mayan herbal medicine. The truth is, the Mayans laid the groundwork for the farm-to-table movement long before it became a hipster tagline. They understood the value of sustainable agriculture, a concept we're desperately trying to reclaim today. Their intricate knowledge of plants wasn't just about healing, it was about living in harmony with their environment. In a world facing climate change and food insecurity, there's a lot to learn from their practices. But let's not get too starry-eyed. For all their wisdom, the Mayans were not immune to the pitfalls of human nature. Their society, like ours, was rife with inequality. While the elite enjoyed the finest herbal remedies, the common folk often had to make do with leftovers. It's a reminder that even the most advanced societies have their blind spots, proving that human history is, a bit like a stubborn weed, resilient, but not without its thorns. And speaking of stubborn traditions, let's talk about the placebo effect. The Mayans, with their elaborate rituals and sacred narratives, might have been onto something. Modern studies show that belief can significantly impact healing, which sounds a lot like the Mayans' mystical approach to medicine. Turns out, a little faith can go a long way. Not that you should skip your flu shot for a chant and a leaf, but it's a testament to the power of the mind. As we wrap up this herbal odyssey, let's marvel at how history has a funny way of coming full circle, especially when it comes to health fads. The Mayans were the original wellness influencers, and their legacy lives on, from the chocolate aisle to the essential oil shelf. They remind us that while the tools and technologies may change, the quest for health and well-being is as old as civilization itself. So next time you're sipping on your artisanal cacao drink or indulging in a spa day infused with ancient oils, give a nod to the Mayans. Their herbal wisdom has survived the ages, proving that good ideas, much like good chocolate, are timeless. And as we continue to explore the echoes of their civilization, remember, history isn't just about what happened back then. It's about how those stories shape who we are today. In the end, we're all just trying to find a little balance, one herb at a time. If you had asked a Roman in the 3rd century BCE what they thought about philosophy, you'd probably get the same look you'd receive today if you asked someone their opinion on quantum physics. Vague interest mixed with a dash of dread. Romans, you see, were the original practical guys. They had aqueducts, roads, and a knack for conquering territories, which seems like a full plate without throwing abstract thought experiments into the mix. But just like how every party eventually gets that one guest who's dying to discuss existentialism, you know the one, Rome eventually caught the philosophy bug from their Greek neighbors. Now, the Romans didn't just stumble upon philosophy like an accidental Amazon purchase. No, they were seduced by the Greeks, who were basically the Kardashians of intellectual thought back in the day. The Greeks had it all. Socrates with his probing questions that made people squirm. Aristotle, the original jack of all trades, who wrote about everything from ethics to zoology, and Pythagoras, who was less about triangles and more about starting a full-blown cult. These thinkers were celebrities long before the invention of reality TV. The Romans, notoriously good at absorbing and then enhancing what they found useful, saw an opportunity. They approached Greek philosophy with the same gusto they showed when adopting Greek gods, which is to say, they took what they liked and put a Roman spin on it. And while they were at it, they didn't shy away from a little competition. Much like how Apple and Samsung constantly try to outdo each other, Rome wanted to take Greek thought and make it, well, Roman. The thing is, early Roman philosophy was kind of like Roman cuisine, borrowed from their Greek counterparts but spiced up with local flavor. Enter figures like Cicero, who wasn't just a philosopher but also a politician, lawyer, and, by some accounts, a bit of a pompous windbag. Cicero loved Greek philosophy but thought it needed tweaking to fit Roman sensibilities. So, he played matchmaker, introducing Stoicism, a philosophy that emphasized logic and control, to a culture that already worshipped discipline and duty. Interestingly, while the Romans were busy philosophizing, they also engaged in a bit of myth-making. To justify their newfound hobby, they claimed that Pythagoras himself had visited Italy, specifically the city of Croton. Now, whether Pythagoras actually made it to Italy is up for debate. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of George Washington chopping down a cherry tree. It's a nice story, but probably not true. Still, it did the trick, giving Roman philosophers a sort of origin story, a narrative that said, hey, we've been into this philosophy thing for ages too. Meanwhile, the Roman upper class had a love-hate relationship with these Greek ideas. On one hand, they admired the Greeks' intellectual achievements. On the other, they couldn't help but see themselves as the rightful heirs to the world stage, destined to improve upon the Greek model. This was a time when philosophy was not just about pondering existence, but also about power, influence, and prestige. When Scipio Africanus, the Roman general famed for defeating Hannibal, brought the philosopher Ennius to Rome, it wasn't just for the conversation. He knew it was a status symbol. And let's not forget Cato the Elder, who was so suspicious of Greek influence that he famously warned against letting Greek philosophers corrupt Roman youth. Yet, despite his grumblings, Greek culture was the intellectual gold standard. It was the Harvard degree of the ancient world. If you wanted to be taken seriously in Roman high society, you had to know your way around a Socratic dialogue. The adoption of philosophy by Rome was not without its economic implications. As Roman elites embraced Greek tutors and philosophers, they were essentially investing in their own cultural capital. Philosophers became part of the Roman household, akin to today's personal trainers or life coaches. This wasn't a cheap endeavor, but for the wealthy, it was worth every denarius. They were banking on philosophy to provide not just personal enlightenment, but also social clout. Through all this, the Romans never lost their practical edge. While they admired the Greeks' ability to wax poetic about the meaning of life, They were more interested in philosophy that had real-world applications. Stoicism, with its emphasis on self-control and duty, fit like a glove. It was philosophy you could live by, not just think about. So, while the Romans may have started out as philosophical skeptics, they soon became passionate converts, albeit with a competitive twist. They took the best of Greek thought, added a pinch of Roman pragmatism, and set out to achieve intellectual greatness. This was more than an academic exercise. It was a cultural evolution, a sign that Rome was not just the center of military might, but also an emerging hub of intellectual power. And just like that, philosophy became as much a part of Roman life as gladiatorial games and lavish banquets, although hopefully with a bit less bloodshed. And just like that, philosophy became as much a part of Roman life as gladiatorial games and lavish banquets, although hopefully with a bit less bloodshed. Now, let's zoom in on the philosophical heavyweight of the Roman world, Stoicism. If the philosophies were a lineup of reality TV stars, Stoicism would be the unflappable one who calmly sips tea while chaos erupts around them. Stoicism wasn't about retreating to a cave to ponder life's mysteries. It was about keeping your cool in the middle of the Roman Senate, where betrayal was as common as toga parties. Enter Seneca, a man who could have moonlighted as a self-help guru had he been born 2 millennia later. This guy had the unenviable task of being the tutor to Emperor Nero. Talk about a tough gig. Imagine trying to teach emotional resilience and ethical behavior to someone who would eventually burn down part of Rome and blame it on a minority group. Seneca was like the ancient world's version of a life coach for a client who just couldn't stop setting things on fire. Seneca's brand of Stoicism was refreshingly pragmatic. He didn't just talk about virtue in the abstract, he wrote about how to survive court intrigue without losing your sanity or your head. His letters and essays were the ancient equivalent of a guide to surviving toxic workplaces. Seneca taught that true wealth wasn't found in a loaded coin purse, but in a mind free of anxiety, which was a comforting thought in a world where economic stability was about as reliable as a Roman chariot on a rainy day. Now, let's not kid ourselves. Seneca wasn't living in a humble shack wearing a hair shirt. Nope, he was fabulously wealthy, with estates sprawling across Italy. But here's the kicker. He understood the absurdity of it all. He knew that all the riches in the empire couldn't buy inner peace. In one of his famous works, he mused that no man was ever wise by chance, which was a fancy way of saying that you couldn't just stumble into a Zen state while juggling coins. While Seneca was busy writing letters that would survive the ages, Marcus Aurelius was out there proving you could be both a philosopher and an emperor. Yes, Marcus Aurelius is that rare breed of leader who actually wrote a book that people still read today, his Meditations. Picture this, a Roman emperor sitting in his tent on the Danube frontier, jotting down thoughts on self-control while his legions were out there trying to prevent Germanic tribes from crashing the empire's party. Marcus Aurelius's version of Stoicism was like the ancient world's keep calm and carry on poster. His reign was littered with crises, from plagues to wars, and yet here was a leader who preached the virtues of reason and restraint. If Rome was a pressure cooker of political scheming, Marcus was the steam valve. He was the kind of guy who, in today's world, would have a podcast titled Meditations with Marcus, where he'd calmly discuss the perils of vanity and the importance of community service. And yet, let's not romanticize too much. Being a Stoic emperor didn't mean Marcus was immune to the harsh realities of his time. The Roman Empire was a behemoth with an insatiable appetite for conquest and control, and even the most philosophical of emperors had to play the game of power. His meditations weren't just idle musings, they were lifelines in a world where the stakes were as high as they come. This was a guy who had to balance contemplating the nature of the universe with managing an empire that spanned 3 continents. Stoicism appealed to Romans because it was philosophy with a practical edge. It didn't ask them to retreat into solitude, it encouraged them to engage with the world without losing their cool. In an empire where political backstabbing was as regular as bathhouse visits, Stoicism's emphasis on inner stability was a survival tool. It was the mental armor against the constant threat of political assassinations, a real issue when your career path could end with a dagger between your ribs. But here's the twist. The very qualities that made Stoicism so appealing also made it a target. The Roman elite found the Stoic emphasis on equality and rationality a bit too radical for comfort. After all, if everyone was supposed to be equal in the eyes of reason, what did that say about the rigid hierarchy of Roman society? Stoics like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius had to navigate this delicate balance of promoting a philosophy that valued virtue for all while living in a world where power was concentrated in the hands of a few. Yet, despite the contradictions, Stoicism endured. It was the philosophy that told Romans it was okay to have desires as long as you weren't a slave to them. It whispered to them that while the world might be chaotic, they could control their reactions. In a time when fortunes could shift with the whims of an emperor, this was a reassuring message. Stoicism didn't promise a utopia, it offered a way to thrive in the real world. And so, the Stoics left their mark on Rome, not just through their writings, but through their lives. They were the philosophers who dared to think deeply while navigating the treacherous waters of Roman politics. They were the ones who tried to infuse a bit of sanity into an empire that often seemed teetering on the brink of madness. In the next part of our journey, we'll explore how these ideas permeated Roman society and how the Stoic legacy lived on, even as the empire faced its inevitable decline. But that's a story for another day. For now, let's just appreciate the Stoics' ability to keep calm and carry on, even when the world around them was anything but serene. Now, as the Stoics were busy keeping their cool under the Roman sun, their philosophical rivals, the Epicureans, were living life like they'd discovered the ancient equivalent of a cozy Netflix binge. If Stoicism was all about duty and keeping a stiff upper lip, Epicureanism was more like a warm hug from a friend who always knows how to make you laugh. This wasn't hedonism run amok, despite what later critics might say. Epicurus, the OG of feel-good philosophy, taught that true pleasure came from the absence of pain, and that the finest banquet was a simple meal shared with friends. But try explaining that to a society obsessed with lavish feasts, and you'll see why the Epicureans had their work cut out for them. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, approached this philosophical buffet much like they did their famous banquets, with a little bit of everything on their plate. Stoics and Epicureans were like the philosophical Montagues and Capulets, minus the poison and teenage angst. Sure, they had their differences, but in the grand scheme of things they were surprisingly civil. You'd think they'd be chucking amphorae at each other across the forum. But no, they were more like two sides of the same philosophical coin, each trying to answer the same burning question: what does it mean to live a good life? And in a rapidly expanding empire, this question couldn't have been more relevant. Rome was growing faster than a weed in a neglected garden. As territory swelled, so did the complexities of Roman life. The elites were caught between the old ways of Stoic duty and the new allure of Epicurean pleasure. It was like trying to decide between a sensible pair of sandals and those flashy new Gladiator boots everyone was talking about. Except, instead of footwear, we're talking about entire life philosophies. The Epicureans weren't advocating for a life of indulgence, contrary to popular myth. Epicurus himself would likely have been appalled at the notion of wild parties in his name. His teachings were more about finding tranquility and freedom from fear, especially the fear of the gods and death. In a society where being killed by a capricious emperor was a real occupational hazard, this was a selling point. Epicureans didn't deny the gods, they just didn't think the gods gave a fig about human affairs. This was radical stuff in a world where appeasing the divine was practically a national pastime. Yet, the Romans, with their penchant for order and hierarchy, found Stoicism's disciplined approach generally more palatable. It was the philosophy of choice for senators, generals, and anyone who had to navigate the treacherous waters of Roman politics. Epicureanism, on the other hand, appealed more to those who wanted a retreat from the chaos, a peaceful garden where they could ponder life's mysteries without worrying about the next political coup. It was less about sybaritic indulgence and more about personal peace, a hard sell in a culture that thrived on conquest and spectacle. But here's where it gets interesting. Both schools of thought, in their own ways, addressed the broader societal tensions of their time. Rome was an empire in flux, torn between the simplicity of its origins and the complexities of its imperial ambitions. Stoicism reinforced the virtues that had built the empire: duty, discipline, and resilience, while Epicureanism offered a respite from the relentless pressure to conquer and expand. It was like having a philosophical toolkit with both a hammer and a feather duster, depending on whether you needed to build or simply dust off the chaos. Economically, these philosophies also mirrored the disparities in Roman society. Stoicism, with its emphasis on virtue and public service, found a natural home among the elite who could afford the luxury of principles. Epicureanism, meanwhile, offered solace to those who might not have had political power but sought a measure of control over their inner lives. This wasn't just about personal choices. It was about navigating the economic realities of a society where wealth and power were increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few. And let's not forget the political implications. Stoic ideals like rationality and equality were noble in theory, but in practice they often clashed with the entrenched hierarchies of Roman life. Epicureanism, with its focus on individual happiness, sidestepped these issues, offering a personal escape rather than a societal blueprint. Both philosophies, in their own way, provided a counterbalance to the excesses of Roman life, like philosophical yin and yang trying to keep the empire from tipping over. So there you have it, the epic face-off between Stoicism and Epicureanism, two schools of thought duking it out in the arena of Roman philosophy. They were like a pair of seasoned gladiators, each with their own style, each appealing to different facets of Roman society. And while they might not have resolved the question of what it means to live a good life, they certainly gave the Romans plenty to think about in between their endless conquests and political intrigues. In our next leg of the journey, we will delve deeper into how these philosophical ideas permeated Roman culture and how the ordinary citizens of Rome engaged with them. Stay tuned, because the story of Roman philosophy is far from over, and there's still plenty of intrigue and insight to uncover. But for now, let's sit back and appreciate the Romans' ability to juggle these philosophical balls while keeping the empire's wheels from falling off. Now, as we wade deeper into the philosophical quagmire of late Republican Rome, let's shine the spotlight on Cicero, a man who played politics like others played the lyre. Cicero, or Marcus Tullius Cicero if we're being formal, is the sort of historical figure who would have thrived on Twitter, armed with a thesaurus and an agenda. In a world where sharp words could cut as deeply as a gladiator's blade, Cicero was the ultimate verbal gladiator. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Cicero was more than just a wordsmith. He was a master of using philosophy as a political tool. This was an era when Rome was less of a serene republic and more of a political pressure cooker, bubbling over with conspiracies and power grabs. Cicero, ever the opportunist, realized that philosophy wasn't just for ivory tower types or those with too much time on their hands. No, philosophy could shape public opinion, win debates, and, if wielded correctly, save your neck, literally. Now, Cicero wasn't just borrowing from the Greeks like someone cribbing notes before a test. He was remixing their ideas to fit the Roman mold. Take Stoicism, for example. While the Stoics were all about keeping calm and carrying on, Cicero saw an opportunity to turn that calmness into persuasive rhetoric. He would lean into Stoic ideas when it was politically expedient, championing virtues like justice and courage, while conveniently sidestepping the more egalitarian bits. After all, in a Rome where power was as concentrated as its wine, one had to tread carefully. And let's talk about Cicero's love affair with Greek philosophy. While the Romans often treated Greek ideas like a buffet, sampling a bit of this and that, Cicero went all in. He was that rare breed of politician who genuinely believed in the power of philosophy to improve public life. He translated Greek works into Latin, making them accessible to his fellow Romans who were more accustomed to military drills than Socratic dialogues. His efforts weren't just about spreading knowledge, they were strategic moves in the chess game of Roman politics. Speaking of strategy, Cicero's most famous political maneuver was his takedown of Catiline, a senator with a penchant for plotting insurrections. In 63 BCE, when Catiline's conspiracy to overthrow the government came to light, Cicero didn't just rely on the Senate's muscle to quash the threat. Oh no, he delivered the Catilinarian orations, speeches so scathing they could have melted marble. Using a mix of philosophical reasoning and rhetorical flair, Cicero painted Catiline as a threat to Rome's very soul. This wasn't just about protecting the Republic, it was about framing himself as Rome's philosophical savior, a man who could turn words into weapons. But here's the rub, not everyone was buying what Cicero was selling. To some Romans, all this philosophizing was as useful as a toga in a rainstorm. They saw Cicero's speeches as grandstanding, his philosophic posturing as little more than a smokescreen for ambition. And let's face it, Cicero wasn't exactly shy about his aspirations. He wanted power, and he wanted it bad. For every Roman who admired his eloquence, there was another who rolled their eyes, seeing him as just another politician playing dress-up in a philosopher's cloak. Economically speaking, Rome was a beast of an empire, with wealth and resources flowing in from all corners of its territories. But with great wealth came great corruption. Cicero, ever the moral crusader, often railed against this corruption, positioning himself as the champion of republican values. Yet, like many of his peers, Cicero wasn't immune to the trappings of wealth. He was known to throw lavish banquets and owned several estates. His personal fortune was estimated in the millions of sesterces, a testament to both his political acumen and his ability to navigate the murky waters of Roman finance. And this is where the myth and reality of Cicero collide. To some, he was a paragon of virtue, the last great defender of the Republic. To others, he was an opportunist, a man who used philosophy as a stepping stone to power. The truth, as always, is more nuanced. Cicero was both. A man driven by ambition and ideals, trying to make sense of a chaotic world with the tools at his disposal. In the arena of Roman politics, Cicero's philosophical endeavours were both his shield and his sword. He used them to craft a legacy, one that endures even today. But let's not romanticize too much. Cicero's story is also a cautionary tale about the limits of philosophy in a world governed by ambition and power. Despite his brilliance, Cicero couldn't prevent the Republic's eventual slide into autocracy. His life ended not with a triumphant speech, but with his execution in 43 BCE, a stark reminder of the perils of Roman politics. Yet, even as his story ended in blood, Cicero's philosophical legacy lived on. His writings continued to influence thinkers for centuries, a testament to the enduring power of words. In the end, Cicero was a man of his time, complex, ambitious and flawed, yet undeniably brilliant. His life and works remain a vivid chapter in the story of Roman philosophy, a tale of how ideas can shape and be shaped by the political landscape. As we move forward in our journey, we'll delve deeper into how these philosophical battles played out in the lives of ordinary Romans. But for now, let's raise a metaphorical glass to Cicero, a man who proved that in Rome, as in life, sometimes the pen really is mightier than the sword. As the curtain falls on Cicero's chapter, we find Rome in a philosophical tailspin, not the exhilarating kind that leaves you breathless with wonder, but the dizzying descent of a once vibrant discourse now overshadowed by swords and shields. The old Republic was gasping, its ideals suffocated by the iron grip of civil wars and external threats. Philosophy, that darling of the Roman elite, was retreating from the bustling forums into the hushed whispers of private salons. It was a shift from public spectacle to intimate discourse, as if the grand theatre of ideas had traded the Colosseum for a back-alley amphitheatre. By the time Julius Caesar strutted across the Rubicon in 49 BCE, declaring, "Alia iacta est," or the die is cast, Rome's intellectual landscape resembled a city after a particularly rowdy Saturnalia in disarray, with more questions than answers. Caesar's bold move was less about philosophical musings and more about raw, unadulterated power. The civil wars that followed were the ultimate reality check, brutally reminding Rome that in the end might often trumped right. As emperors rose and fell like dominoes, the public debate that once thrived on philosophical inquiry was sidelined, replaced by a more pressing concern, survival. Amidst this chaos, philosophy found refuge in the private chambers of the elite. It was a bit like owning a rare manuscript collection, impressive, prestigious, and mostly out of reach for the average Roman. Philosophy became a hobby for the powerful, a cerebral escape from the political turbulence that threatened to engulf them. The likes of Seneca and Marcus Aurelius scribbled their thoughts in private, their words destined to echo through the ages, even if their immediate audience was limited to a select few. It was an intellectual retreat, a retreat from the public sphere where philosophy once reigned as queen. Now, let's not romanticize the exclusivity of this intellectual refuge. The reality was that while the upper crust of Roman society could afford to ponder the nature of virtue over a cup of mulled wine, the masses were more concerned with bread and circuses, the daily grind of existence in an empire that stretched from Britannia to the sands of Egypt. In a world where emperors could decree the fates of men with a thumbs up or down, The philosophical musings of the elite were as relevant to the average Roman as a toga at a toga-free party. Economic factors played no small role in this philosophical shift. As the empire expanded, so did its economic disparity. Wealth was siphoned to the top, leaving the lower classes to grapple with the harsh realities of subsistence. The grandeur of Rome's golden age was built on the backs of slaves and the exploited, a fact that didn't exactly lend itself to philosophical enlightenment for the masses. When your primary concern is not getting trampled by a runaway chariot on the Via Appia, pondering the merits of Stoicism versus Epicureanism takes a back seat. And yet, despite its retreat from the public eye, Roman philosophy left a legacy as enduring as the empire's architectural marvels. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, had taken Greek philosophy, added their own flair, and, in doing so, laid the groundwork for the philosophical traditions that would blossom in the Renaissance and beyond. It was less a question of leaving behind ruins and recipes for garum, a fermented fish sauce that was the ketchup of its day, and more about bequeathing a treasury of thought that would influence generations. In this legacy, we see the Romans' genius for adaptation and continuity. They took what was useful, reshaped it, and passed it down the ages. Their philosophical contributions might not have matched the originality of their Greek predecessors, but they ensured these ideas endured, much like the roads they built that still crisscross Europe today. It was as if by absorbing and preserving, they were safeguarding the DNA of Western thought, ensuring it survived the tumult of their times to inspire the thinkers of the future. So, what did the Romans truly leave behind? A civilization that revered glamour and grit in equal measure, whose philosophical pursuits became a reflection of its political realities. They were the architects of a legacy that extended beyond marble columns and aqueducts, a legacy etched into the very fabric of intellectual history. As the empire crumbled, its philosophical underpinnings persisted, a testament to the enduring power of ideas, even when they retreat from the public stage. In the end, the decline of philosophical discourse in Rome was not the death knell of thought, but a transformation. It marked the shift from a vibrant public exchange to a more introspective, personal endeavour, one that would re-emerge in different forms across the centuries. The Romans, with their pragmatic flair, had ensured that even as their empire fell, their intellectual pursuits would rise anew. The story of Roman philosophy is not just a chapter in the annals of history, it's a living dialogue that continues to resonate, reminding us that while empires fade, ideas persist. And so, as we close the scroll on this chapter of Roman history, let's remember that the legacy of Roman philosophy is not just in the grand narratives or the ruins of the Forum, but in the subtle, enduring influence it exerted on the world that followed. It is a legacy of resilience and adaptation, a testament to the power of thought in the face of adversity. In a world where change is the only constant, the Romans have taught us one thing above all, that while the stage may change, the play goes on. If anyone ever told you the Mongols were just a bunch of wild nomads galloping across the steppes like a medieval biker gang, they were sorely mistaken. Sure, they were the quintessential horse-riding warriors, but they were also strategic masterminds who understood the fine art of fortress building. Forget the Hollywood hype. Genghis Khan wasn't just into speed and chaos, he was also into real estate, and he picked his fortress locations with the precision of a modern-day urban planner with an eye on market trends. Now, let's talk geography. The Mongolian steppes, vast, windswept, and unforgiving, were not exactly prime spots for building cozy castles. But what these lands lacked in comfort, they made up for in strategic brilliance. Think about it, these plains stretched endlessly, creating a natural barrier that was both a blessing and a curse. The Mongols had learned to harness the harshness of their homeland, using it to their advantage. Any would-be invader would find themselves lost in a sea of grass, while the locals knew every nook and cranny like the back of their hand. The Mongols' fortress locations often leveraged the natural defences provided by mountains, rivers, and other topographical features. These weren't your typical stone fortresses, they were often temporary, built with materials like wood and earth, which were as plentiful as the grasses under their horses' hooves. Take, for instance, the Karakoram, which was more than just a city. It was a strategic hub, established in 1220 by Genghis Khan himself. This wasn't just a place where Mongols hung their helmets at night, it was a nerve centre for controlling the vast expanse of the empire. But let's pause for a moment to bust a myth that's as old as the steppes themselves. The idea that the Mongols were purely nomadic, drifting aimlessly from one conquest to another, is as inaccurate as saying the Great Wall of China was built in a weekend. In reality, the Mongols knew when and where to put down roots, especially when those roots could yield tactical advantages. Their fortresses were not only military strongholds but also centers of trade and diplomacy. Fancy that, a bunch of horsemen negotiating trade deals between battles. It's also crucial to remember that the Mongol Empire, at its height, was the largest contiguous land empire in history. That's right, it made Alexander the Great's conquests look like a weekend road trip. We're talking about an empire that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, encompassing roughly 9 million square miles. And yet, they managed to maintain control over this vast expanse not just through brute force, but through a keen understanding of logistics and strategy. Their fortresses served as critical nodes in a vast network that enabled rapid troop movements and efficient communication across thousands of miles. Some might argue that the Mongols were merely lucky, but luck had little to do with it. They were opportunistic, sure, but also incredibly methodical. Their choice of fortress locations wasn't random, it was based on detailed knowledge of the terrain and the ability to exploit both natural and man-made features to their advantage. This wasn't just war, it was chess on a massive scale, and the Mongols were playing with a full set of pieces while their enemies were still figuring out the rules. And let's not forget the economic implications. These fortresses weren't just military installations, they were also economic powerhouses. They facilitated trade along the Silk Road, ensuring a steady flow of goods, information, and wealth. The Mongols understood that control over trade routes meant control over wealth, and by establishing strategic fortresses they could protect and tax the merchants passing through their territory. The result was an empire that wasn't just feared, but also incredibly wealthy. So, the next time someone starts waxing poetic about the savage Mongols, you can nod knowingly and drop some knowledge bombs about their strategic prowess and economic savvy. Because the truth is, the Mongols were more than just conquerors. They were the ultimate strategists, crafting an empire that was as much about intelligence as it was about intimidation. Speaking of strategy and empire building, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of Mongol fortress construction. You might think of the Mongols as the original DIY enthusiasts, but forget about grabbing a hammer and nails from the medieval version of Home Depot. These folks were all about using what was available, and they were masters at it. Picture this, a vast empire stretching across Asia and Europe, and the Mongols needed to secure it. They didn't just erect any old walls and call it a day. No, they were more like ancient project managers with a knack for resource allocation and time management. They used local materials like wood, earth, and stones, which were as abundant as the horses in their stables. It's estimated that the construction of a typical Mongol fortress required around 1,000 workers, most of whom were local laborers or prisoners of war. Talk about making the most of available resources. Now, let's talk economics. Building a fortress wasn't just about piling up rocks, it was an investment, kind of like building a startup in Silicon Valley, but with less Wi-Fi and more oxen. A fortress could cost thousands of dinars, a hefty sum at the time, equivalent to hundreds of thousands of dollars today when adjusted for inflation. The Mongols were savvy enough to know that a well-placed fortress could pay for itself by controlling trade routes and collecting taxes. It's a bit like setting up a toll booth on a busy highway, except the highway was the Silk Road and the tolls were made of silk, spices, and gold. And let's not forget time. Constructing a fortress could take anywhere from a few weeks to several months, depending on the size and complexity. The Mongols were nothing if not efficient. They could throw up a defensive structure faster than you can say Genghis Khan, thanks to their innovative use of prefabricated components. Yes, you heard that right, prefab construction in the 13th century. They were the forefathers of modern architecture without even knowing it. But let's not romanticize this too much. Sure, they were resourceful and innovative, but this was also a time when human life was cheap and labor was, shall we say, plentiful. The Mongols didn't exactly have labor unions negotiating fair wages or benefits for their workers. Instead, they had a steady supply of prisoners and conscripts who were more or less volunteered for the job. In a sense, the Mongols were the ultimate pragmatists. They were like the Swiss Army knife of military tactics, with a tool for every occasion. Need to hold a strategic pass? Build a fortress? Need to exert control over a rebellious region? Build another fortress. They understood that a fortress wasn't just a defensive measure, it was a statement of power and permanence. It said, "We're here to stay, and we're watching you." And let's not forget the psychological impact. There's something intimidating about a fortress looming on the horizon, a constant reminder of Mongol might. It was as much about deterrence as it was about defense. The mere presence of a fortress could quell potential uprisings before they even started. It's much like having a "beware of dog" sign. Sometimes the threat is more powerful than the reality. Now, while the Mongols were busy fortifying their empire, the rest of the world was busy underestimating them. Many of their contemporaries couldn't see past the stereotype of the nomadic warrior, failing to recognize the Mongols' sophisticated approach to governance and infrastructure. They were the Steve Jobs of their era, thinking differently while everyone else was stuck in the past. In summary, the Mongols were not just horseback warriors, they were engineers, economists, and strategists rolled into one. They built fortresses not just as military installations, but as hubs of commerce and control, cleverly blending practicality with innovation. So, the next time someone tries to reduce the Mongols to a bunch of guys on horses, remind them that these were the folks who could build a fortress faster than you can build a piece of IKEA furniture. And they didn't even need an Allen wrench. And speaking of Mongol fortresses being faster to build than your average flat-pack furniture, let's delve into the political and social gears that turned this empire into a well-oiled machine. The Mongols didn't just erect fortresses willy-nilly. Each one was a calculated move in a game of geopolitical chess that would make even Machiavelli raise an eyebrow. These fortresses weren't just about staking claim over land. They were about sending a message, loud and clear. First, let's talk politics. The Mongols were the ultimate power brokers, and their fortresses were like giant exclamation points on the map of their empire. Genghis Khan and his successors understood that controlling territory wasn't just about having the biggest army or the sharpest swords. It was about legitimacy. By building fortresses, they were saying, "This is ours, and we're not going anywhere." It was a way to establish authority and maintain control over a sprawling empire that stretched from Korea to Hungary, covering a staggering 9 million square miles at its peak. Now, you might be wondering why fortresses were so crucial for the Mongols, given their reputation for swift cavalry attacks and lightning-fast conquests. Well, here's the kicker. The Mongols knew that the real power lay in holding territory, not just taking it. They were like savvy real estate moguls who understood that location, location, location was the key to success. By strategically placing fortresses along critical trade routes, they could control and, more importantly, tax the flow of goods along the Silk Road, ensuring a steady stream of revenue into their coffers. It's like monopoly, but with more horses and fewer colourful banknotes. Economically, these fortresses were the beating heart of the empire. They served as hubs for trade and commerce, where merchants could safely exchange goods and services under the watchful eye of the Mongol overseers. The Mongols weren't just warriors. They were shrewd businessmen who understood that an empire isn't built on blood alone. It needs cash flow, and lots of it. By securing the trade routes, they were essentially securing their financial future, ensuring that their empire could sustain itself for generations. Socially, the fortresses played a pivotal role in integrating the diverse cultures and peoples that fell under Mongol rule. The Mongol Empire was a melting pot of ethnicities, languages, and religions, and the fortresses acted as focal points where these various groups could interact and coexist. It was a pragmatic approach to governance. After all, it's easier to rule when your subjects are busy trading and mingling rather than plotting rebellion. The fortresses were like medieval multicultural centers, fostering an exchange of ideas and cultures that enriched the empire as a whole. But let's not sugarcoat it, the politics of fear were also at play. The Mongols were masters of psychological warfare, and their fortresses were instruments of intimidation as much as they were symbols of stability. Imagine being a local chieftain or a rebellious lord, gazing up at the imposing walls of a Mongol fortress looming over your territory. It was a stark reminder of who was in charge, a constant presence that whispered, "Resistance is futile." The Mongols knew that a fortress could quell dissent before it even started, making it a powerful tool in their arsenal. And let's not forget the role of efficient resource use. The Mongols were nothing if not pragmatic. They built their fortresses using local materials, which meant less time and effort spent transporting supplies. It was a smart move that allowed them to construct fortresses quickly and efficiently without the logistical nightmares that plagued other empires. Think of it as getting the most bang for your buck, or in this case, your dinar. The Mongols were like the ultimate DIY enthusiasts, building an empire one fortress at a time, using whatever was available. So there you have it, a glimpse into the political and social engines that powered the Mongol Empire's fortress-building frenzy. These structures weren't just about military might, they were about control, commerce, and culture. As we continue our journey through the Mongol Empire, keep in mind that every fortress was a piece of a larger puzzle, a testament to the Mongols' ability to weave fear and diplomacy into a tapestry of power. Because in the end, it wasn't just about building an empire, it was about building a legacy. And the Mongols knew that a well-placed fortress was worth its weight in gold, or at least in silk and spices. With Mongol fortresses acting as the nerve centers of their vast empire, it's time to unravel the legendary sieges and battles that have been romanticized to the point where they might as well be Hollywood blockbusters. Spoiler alert, the reality was less about grand speeches and more about the gritty mechanics of warfare. And trust me, there were no slow-motion scenes of epic heroism set to Hans Zimmer soundtracks. First, let's address the infamous siege of Baghdad in 1258. This was not your typical medieval siege with knights in shining armor and chivalric duels. The Mongols, under Hulagu Khan, approached Baghdad with the kind of cold efficiency that would make a modern logistics manager weep with joy. Imagine trying to defend a city with roughly 60,000 troops against a Mongol army boasting around 150,000 men. It was like bringing a butter knife to a gunfight. The Abbasid Caliphate, once a beacon of knowledge and culture, faced a grim reality when their walls were breached. The Mongols didn't just conquer, they decimated, reducing one of the world's greatest cities to a smoldering ruin. Talk about a hostile takeover. Now, before you start picturing the Mongols as mindless destroyers, let's pull back the curtain on their strategic genius. You see, the Mongols were the ultimate pragmatists. When they laid siege to a city, they weren't just thinking about the immediate victory, they were calculating the long-term gains. Hulagu didn't just want Baghdad as a trophy, he wanted control over the region's trade routes and resources. This was less about bloodlust and more about balance sheets. The economic impact of controlling Baghdad was massive, and the Mongols knew that ruling a wasteland wasn't part of the plan. So, while the city was sacked, its strategic value was preserved, ready to be exploited for trade and commerce. Speaking of strategy, let's talk about the Siege of Xiangyang, which lasted from 120-67 to 173, a marathon by siege standards. The Mongols, led by Kublai Khan, were up against the formidable Song dynasty, and this wasn't a simple matter of knocking down a few walls. The siege involved a level of innovation that reads like a medieval tech startup story. The Mongols employed catapults designed by Persian engineers, capable of launching massive stones with terrifying accuracy. It was like bringing a trebuchet to a rock fight game over for the defenders. Xiangyang wasn't just a military victory. It was a masterclass in engineering prowess, showcasing how the Mongols absorbed and utilized the skills of those they conquered. Let's not forget the psychological warfare at play here. The Mongols understood the power of fear as a tool of war. They built a reputation that preceded them, turning even the idea of a Mongol siege into a weapon. Cities often surrendered without a fight, preferring to negotiate terms rather than face the wrath of the Mongol horde. It's like the world's most effective marketing campaign, selling dread and submission instead of products. The legend of Mongol invincibility was a carefully cultivated image, and it paid dividends in reducing resistance. But hey, let's not get too swept up in the myth of Mongol invincibility. They weren't superheroes, nor were they infallible. The Mongols faced their fair share of defeats, proving that even the best-laid plans can go awry. Take the failed invasions of Japan in 1274 and 1281, thwarted not by samurai might, but by the kamikaze, divine winds, or, more accurately, typhoons that smashed their fleets to pieces. Nature, it seems, was an adversary they couldn't outsmart. These events illustrate an important truth. The Mongols were formidable, but they weren't immune to the whims of fate and the unpredictability of the world. Now, let's address the elephant, or rather, the warhorse. In the room, the idea that Mongol success was purely down to their cavalry. While the horsemen of the steppes were indeed formidable, it was their adaptability and strategic prowess that truly set them apart. They were masters of both siegecraft and open-field battle, able to pivot from one strategy to another with remarkable agility. It's like they were playing chess while everyone else was stuck on checkers, always thinking several moves ahead. In the end, the legendary sieges and battles involving Mongol fortresses were less about the romance of war and more about the brutal realities of survival and dominance. They were a testament to the Mongols' ability to blend ferocity with finesse, to wield both terror and tact. So, while the tales of Mongol might evoke images of unstoppable hordes and impregnable fortresses, the truth is far more complex and, dare I say, human, because beneath the legend lies a story of strategic brilliance, economic acumen, and a relentless drive to shape the world to their will, a story that continues to resonate long after the dust of their conquests has settled. So, as the dust settled over the vast expanse of the Mongol Empire, let's not forget to peek behind the curtain and see what all those fortresses really left behind. Spoiler alert, it's not just ruins and legends. The Mongols' strategic use of fortifications wasn't just a medieval quirk, it was a game-changer that left a legacy as enduring as the Great Wall itself, minus the sticky rice mortar. First, let's talk influence. The Mongols were like the original influencers, making waves that reached far beyond their own borders. Their approach to fortifications laid the groundwork for later empires to follow. Take the Ottoman Empire, for instance. They took a page right out of the Mongol playbook, focusing on control through strategic fortresses. The Ottomans understood that a well-placed fortress was like having the best seat at the geopolitical poker table, allowing them to maintain control over their vast territories, much like the Mongols did across their 9 million square mile empire. Then there's the matter of military strategy. The Mongols demonstrated that the art of war was as much about brains as it was about brawn. They didn't just charge in with sword swinging, they laid down a blueprint for integrating fortifications into a broader military strategy. This was a lesson not lost on later military minds. The principles of rapid mobility, logistical foresight, and strategic placement of fortifications were concepts that echoed through the ages, eventually influencing European military practices. By the time the Renaissance rolled around, generals were poring over maps with the same intensity as a gamer at a tournament, looking to replicate the Mongol model of strategic depth and defense. Now, on to the economic impact. Remember, the Mongols were as much about the Benjamins, or rather the dinars, as they were about conquests. Their fortresses were more than just piles of earth and timber, they were economic engines that powered trade and commerce. The lessons learned by controlling the Silk Road echoed through history. Fast forward to the 19th century, and you'll see the British Empire adopting similar tactics in their colonies, using fortified positions to oversee and tax lucrative trade routes, much like their Mongol predecessors. It was like the Mongols handed down a recipe for empire building, and the British were keen to follow it to the letter. And let us not overlook the social legacy. The Mongols were masters at integrating diverse cultures into their empire, and their fortresses served as melting pots where ideas, goods, and people mingled. This wasn't just about keeping the peace. It was about fostering a multicultural empire that could sustain itself through cooperation rather than coercion. Sound familiar? It's a concept that resonates in our modern globalized world, where cities serve as cultural and economic hubs not so different from those Mongol fortresses. Of course, let's not romanticize everything. The Mongols were also a reminder that power, no matter how well fortified, is fleeting. Their empire eventually crumbled, its fortresses reduced to relics, yet the myths linger on, like the belief that the Mongols were unstoppable super warriors. In reality, they were as subject to the whims of nature and the tides of history as anyone else. Their fortresses were symbols of power, sure, but also of pragmatic necessity in an era where control was as much about perception as it was about presence. So, what can modern military strategists learn from the Mongols? Well, it's not about dusting off ancient siege tactics, but about understanding the balance of hard and soft power. The Mongols knew that fortresses alone couldn't hold an empire. It was their strategic integration with mobility, economics, and diplomacy that made them so formidable. In today's world, where cyber warfare and drones dominate discussions, the Mongols' holistic approach to strategy remains surprisingly relevant. It's as if they were playing 4D chess while the rest of the world was still fumbling with checkers. And as for those enduring myths, they remind us of the human penchant for simplifying history into tidy narratives of good and evil, hero and villain. The Mongols were neither saints nor demons, but rather complex figures navigating the messy realities of empire building. Their story is a testament to the power of strategy, the impermanence of conquest, and the enduring allure of a good legend. Because, in the end, history is as much about the stories we tell ourselves as it is about the facts we uncover. So there you have it, folks. A tale of Mongol fortresses that stretches from the windswept steppes of Asia to the very heart of modern military thought. It's a story that blends the romantic with the real, the legendary with the logistical. Next time you pass by a crumbling fortress or hear a tale of Mongol might, remember that beneath the surface lies a rich tapestry of strategy, innovation, and human ambition, a legacy that, in many ways, still shapes our world today. Who knew that the clatter of hooves across the steppes would echo so far and wide? In the realm of ancient Greece, where gods mingled with mortals like they were all just regulars at the same celestial cafe, the Oracle of Delphi emerged as a divine hotline. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't just some mythological call center. It was the epicenter of ancient decision-making, a place where you could ask the gods for a little sneak peek of your future, assuming you didn't mind the cryptic, fortune cookie-style responses. How did such a mystical advice bureau come to be, you ask? Well, it all started with some goats, a chasm, and a location that was as remote as it was significant. Our story kicks off with a bunch of goats. Yes, goats. Picture this, a herd of them prancing around the slopes of Mount Parnassus. Legend has it that these goats, led by a particularly adventurous goatherd, stumbled upon a fissure in the earth. From this gap emerged vapors that, when inhaled, sent the goats into a delightful, hallucinogenic dance. Think Woodstock, but with more bleating. Observing this woolly rave, the goatherd took a whiff himself and, lo and behold, started prophesying like he was the ancient Greek version of Nostradamus. Word spread faster than gossip at a toga party, and soon humans were climbing the mountain, not for the view, but for a shot at divine enlightenment. But what made Delphi the prime location for this celestial Q&A booth? Let's talk geography and economics, because even in ancient times, location was everything. Nestled in the Pleistos Valley, with a panoramic view that could make a postcard jealous, Delphi was conveniently positioned on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, about 15 kilometers from the Corinthian Gulf. This wasn't just for the aesthetic. Delphi was smack dab in the middle of the Greek world, which made it accessible yet sacred, like having a high-end boutique in the middle of a bustling city. It was far enough to feel exclusive, yet close enough that city-states could send emissaries without blowing the budget on travel expenses. By the 6th century BCE, Delphi was more than just a pretty face. It became a bustling hub where politics, religion, and commerce intersected. The oracle, who spent her days inhaling those potent vapors, was the go-to gal for everyone from kings planning wars to farmers worried about their crops. Her cryptic messages were considered worth their weight in gold, or in drachmas to be precise. And speaking of drachmas, let's not underestimate the economic juggernaut that was Delphi. Pilgrims came with offerings, and their coins filled the temple coffers, turning Delphi into a financial powerhouse. It was like Wall Street, but with more laurel wreaths and fewer suits. Now, let's talk temple construction. The first temple dedicated to Apollo, the god who supposedly owned the joint, was built in the 7th century BCE. But like any property in a prime location, it went through several renovations and rebuilds, thanks to earthquakes and the occasional fire, though no one was grilling souvlaki inside, I assure you. The construction was a logistical feat, involving not just local labor, but also skilled artisans from across the Greek world. Stones had to be quarried, transported, and carved with precision, and all without the help of modern machinery. Imagine building a skyscraper with nothing but chisels and sheer willpower. The temple's grandeur was not just for show, it was a statement. It said, "Here lies the center of the world," and people believed it. According to myth, Zeus himself sent 2 eagles flying from the eastern and western ends of the earth, and where they met, voila! Delphi. The Greeks even marked the spot with the omphalos, a navel-shaped stone, effectively branding Delphi as the belly button of the universe. If that sounds like a clever marketing ploy, that's because it was. The Greeks were nothing if not savvy in the art of branding, but let's not get too swept away by the romance of it all. Behind the myths and the marble, Delphi was a place of realpolitik. City-states sent envoys not just to seek divine counsel, but to gain leverage. Imagine if the United Nations had an oracle on staff. That's the kind of influence we're talking about. The Delphic priests, ever the pragmatists, knew how to play their cards, offering advice that was vague enough to cover all bases, but insightful enough to maintain their reputation. So, as we wrap up this first act of our Delphic drama, remember, Delphi wasn't just about mysticism and prophecy. It was a confluence of geography, economy, and human ambition, a place where goats unwittingly set the stage for a spiritual and economic powerhouse. The Oracle of Delphi wasn't just a mouthpiece of the gods, she was a key player in the grand theatre of human history, where the stakes were as high as Mount Parnassus itself. Now, while we've set the stage with goats and geography, let's swivel the spotlight to the true stars of this ancient drama, the Pythia, the women who channeled the divine whispers of Apollo. These were no ordinary priestesses, mind you. They were the spiritual equivalent of rock stars, except with more laurel wreaths and significantly less leather. The Pythia weren't plucked from the aristocracy or trained in the arts of rhetoric and philosophy. In fact, they were often chosen from among the local peasantry. Yes, the original girl-next-door narrative, but with a twist of divine destiny. The selection process was as meticulous as an ancient Greek could get. The Pythia had to be of pure character, a widow or maiden, preferably from a humble background. This wasn't about social status, it was about purity and, ironically, being relatable. The idea was that an unassuming background would make them less susceptible to corruption and more in touch with the gods. You didn't want someone who'd been rubbing elbows with the elite to suddenly start channeling Apollo's messages through the lens of a socialite. It was all about authenticity, or at least the perception of it. Once chosen, a Pythia's life was a heady mix of ritual and routine. She didn't just waltz into the temple and start spouting prophecies. There was a strict regimen involved, starting with purification rituals that included a dip in the Castalian spring, which was cold enough to make even the bravest shiver. This was followed by a procession to the temple, where she'd take her seat on a tripod over the sacred chasm. And let's not forget about the most talked-about element, the vapors. The idea that these fumes were some mystical substance inducing divine visions is a tale as old as Delphi itself. However, modern science suggests that the vapors might have been ethylene gas, which, coincidentally, can cause hallucinations. So, while the Pythia wasn't exactly tripping on ancient psychedelics, she did have a little help from geology. The Pythia's messages were famously cryptic, often delivered in a trance-like state. Picture a scene straight out of a Hollywood script, except this was real, and the stakes were higher than any blockbuster could muster. Her pronouncements could sway entire city-states, influence wars, and alter the course of history. Yet, despite their gravity, these messages were delightfully ambiguous, allowing for multiple interpretations. This wasn't just a quirk of divine communication, it was a masterstroke of diplomacy. By keeping things vague, the Pythia and her entourage ensured that they remained relevant and revered, no matter the outcome. Now, let's talk compensation, because maintaining a divine hotline wasn't pro bono. Despite the grandeur of their role, the Pythia weren't exactly rolling in drachmas. They were supported by the temple, which provided for their basic needs, a modest lifestyle that included food, clothing, and shelter. But forget golden thrones or lavish banquets. This was ancient Greece, after all, not MTV Cribs. The real wealth lay in the influence they wielded. In a world where women's voices were often confined to the domestic sphere, the Pythia's words carried the weight of gods. They were consulted by kings and commoners alike, catapulting them into a realm of socio-political power that was virtually unrivaled in the ancient world. Their influence extended far beyond the temple walls. Consider this. When the mighty Croesus of Lydia sought to test the oracles of the ancient world, it was the Pythia who delivered the famous, if somewhat enigmatic prophecy that if he waged war on Persia, he would destroy a great empire. Spoiler alert, it turned out to be his own. This is why the Pythia's pronouncements were both revered and feared. They could make or break leaders, and their cryptic nature meant they were always right, at least in retrospect. The Pythia's role was not merely about foretelling the future, it was about shaping it. In a society dominated by male voices, they carved out a unique niche where their influence was not just tolerated, but sought after. They were the ultimate power brokers, mediating between the divine and the mortal, and doing so with a flair that would put modern spin doctors to shame. The Pythia's words were currency, and in the economy of ancient Greece, they were as valuable as gold. As the centuries rolled on, the role of the Pythia evolved, adapting to the changing political landscapes. What started as a purely religious role gradually intertwined with the intricate web of Greek politics. They were not just passive conduits for divine messages, they were active participants in the grand game of thrones that played out across the Hellenic world. It's a testament to their enduring legacy that even today we speak of oracles and prophecies with a sense of awe and wonder, a nod to a time when the future was as nebulous as those ancient vapors. So, as we leave the Pythia for now, remember, these women were more than just the mouthpieces of Apollo. They were the architects of destiny, shaping the course of history with their enigmatic utterances. Behind the myths and the marble, they were real women with real influence, standing at the crossroads of fate and free will. And in the annals of history, that's not just a footnote, it's a headline. Now that we've tangled with the Pythia and her cryptic prophecies, let's take a sharp turn into the bustling world that orbited around the Oracle of Delphi. This was no sleepy little shrine in the middle of nowhere. Delphi was a thriving economic powerhouse where the clink of coins was as common as the whispers of the gods. Think of it as the ancient world's version of a gold rush town, minus the saloons, but with an abundance of marble and mythology. First, let's talk about those consultation fees. Getting a personal audience with the oracle wasn't like grabbing a coffee with your local barista. This was an exclusive experience, and exclusivity comes at a price. The consultation fees varied depending on who you were. City-states and the affluent could afford hefty offerings, while the average pilgrim might have to settle for a smaller donation, assuming they could get an appointment at all. We're talking about a system that could rival any modern-day VIP waiting list, where influence and silver drachmas could buy you a front-row seat to destiny. Now, when you have a place as significant as Delphi, you also have the inevitable spin-off economy. Pilgrims didn't just come to hear the oracle, they came to leave their mark and their money. The sanctuary was a veritable marketplace of offerings, with everything from golden statues to simple votive figurines. These weren't just knickknacks, they were tangible symbols of devotion and status. Imagine an ancient Greek version of a souvenir shop, where instead of I poi Delphi t-shirts, you had intricately crafted dedications to Apollo. It was a booming trade, and everyone wanted a piece of the action, even the gods, it seemed. Delphi was also a hub for the Amphictonic League, a sort of ancient Greek UN that played a vital role in maintaining the sanctuary's neutrality. This wasn't just a bunch of toga-clad diplomats sitting around a table sipping wine. The League was composed of representatives from various Greek tribes and city-states, bound by their shared interest in ensuring Delphi remained a neutral ground. Their job was to oversee the sanctuary's protection and upkeep, a task that often required navigating the murky waters of Greek politics. The League's authority was no trivial matter. It wielded the power to levy fines, organize military campaigns, and even declare sacred wars. Talk about a diplomatic toolkit. This neutrality was crucial because Delphi's central position in the Greek world meant it was constantly in the crosshairs of political maneuvering. It was a delicate dance, one that required the Amphictyonic League to flex its muscles occasionally to remind everyone that Delphi was off-limits for conquest and conflict. But let's not romanticize it too much. The League wasn't immune to the occasional bout of corruption and intrigue. Just like any political body, it had its fair share of backroom deals and power plays. Neutrality, it turns out, is a lot harder to maintain when there are so many vested interests at stake. Speaking of interests, let's not forget the not-so-divine political shenanigans that sometimes engulfed Delphi. The sanctuary was a prime target for those looking to gain leverage in the ever-shifting balance of Greek power. Wars were planned, alliances forged, and rivalries stoked, all under the watchful gaze of the oracle. And while the priests of Delphi were ostensibly above such mortal concerns, there's no denying that some prophecies seemed suspiciously convenient for certain patrons. In the game of thrones that was ancient Greece, the oracle's words could be a potent weapon, wielded with cunning and guile by those who knew how to play the game. In one infamous episode, the sanctuary found itself embroiled in the sacred wars, conflicts that were less about piety and more about power. The first of these wars, around 595 BCE, was ostensibly fought to protect Delphi's sacred ground. But let's be real, it was as much about territorial ambition as it was about divine sanctity. The Amphictyonic League took up arms against the city of Crisa, which had been extorting pilgrims en route to Delphi. The League's victory not only secured the sanctuary's autonomy, but also underscored the potent mix of religion and politics that defined the era. But don't mistake these political machinations for mere background noise. They were the heartbeat of an ancient world where religion and politics were as intertwined as the laurel leaves that crowned Apollo's head. Delphi was a place where the divine and the mundane collided, where the sacred and the secular danced a complex tango that dictated the fate of nations. A place where every whisper of the oracle could ripple across the Greek world, sowing seeds of hope, fear, and ambition. Yet, amidst all this, the allure of Delphi remained undeniable, a testament to its enduring power and mystery. As we delve deeper into Delphi's story, keep in mind that this was a world where myth and reality blended seamlessly, where the gods were as much a part of the landscape as the mountains themselves. Delphi was not just a place, it was an idea, a beacon of hope, and a crucible of power. A place where dreams took shape and destinies were forged in the smoky haze of the oracle's chamber. And while the myths may paint a picture of divine intervention, the truth is often more human and far more fascinating. So, strap in, because the story of Delphi is far from over, and the road ahead promises more twists and turns than a labyrinthine Greek myth. Just as the myths of Delphi interweave reality and fantasy, let's unravel the threads of some legendary consultations with the oracle that have fueled fireside tales for millennia. Consider the case of Tencresis of Lydia, circa 560 BCE, who, drowning in riches and ambition, asked the oracle whether to wage war against Persia. The Pythia's reply, "If you cross the river, a great empire will fall." A tad ambiguous, right? Like a fortune cookie with a penchant for irony. Croesus, with all the confidence of the man who thinks he's just unlocked a divine cheat code, went to war. Spoiler, the empire that fell was his own. Talk about an epic gotcha moment from the gods. Moving on to another tantalizing tale, we have the legend of Socrates, the philosophical heavyweight. According to his buddy Xenophon, when asked if anyone was wiser than Socrates, the oracle answered with an unequivocal number. Socrates, famously skeptical and perpetually in self-doubt mode, embarked on a quest to find someone wiser, inadvertently cementing his own reputation in the annals of wisdom. It's like being told you're the smartest kid in class, then spending your life trying to prove you're not. Ah, the irony of intellectual humility. But let's not get too swept away by the grandeur of these stories. They're sprinkled with drama, sure, but the reality was often less glamorous and more, well, mundane. Many consultations involved everyday concerns. Will my crops survive the winter? Is my cousin really the best suitor for my daughter? Questions that didn't exactly make the history books, but were essential to the lives of those who asked. The oracle was, after all, a spiritual Swiss army knife, serving both kings and commoners with equal ambiguity. Now, while these tales paint the oracle as the ultimate celestial advice columnist, let's not forget that her words were often as clear as mud. This was not a bug, but a feature. Those vague prophecies? They allowed for creative interpretations, ensuring that the oracle was never technically wrong. It's a diplomatic maneuver that even modern politicians would envy. They could have taught a masterclass in covering all bases with style. However, as with all good things, the oracle's influence started to decline. Enter the 4th century BCE, a time when the Greek world was undergoing seismic shifts, both literally and metaphorically. The rise of new powers, like Macedon under Philip II and his son Alexander the Great, reshuffled the ancient world's political deck. With these new players came a new game, one where the oracle's cryptic whispers held less sway over leaders who were more enamored with military might than divine musings. Fast forward a few centuries to the dawning era of Roman influence. The Romans, ever the pragmatic empire builders, took a shine to Delphi's prestige, but weren't entirely sold on its spiritual stock. To them, the oracle was more like a novelty act, a relic of a bygone age. By the time Emperor Nero came around in the 1st century CE, Delphi was more a tourist destination than a spiritual centre. Nero, notorious for his ego and extravagance, even plundered the temple's treasures, casually carting off 500 bronze statues. Talk about taking a souvenir. The real nail in Delphi's coffin, though, came with the rise of Christianity. By the 4th century CE, Emperor Theodosius I was busy issuing edicts that would make the pagan gods as obsolete as a floppy disk. In 393 CE, he ordered the cessation of all pagan rituals, including the oracles. Delphi's days as the divine hotline were over, its sacred fires snuffed out by the sweeping tide of monotheism. But let's not mourn just yet. The legacy of Delphi, like the myths it spawned, is far from dead. It lingers in our collective consciousness, a testament to humanity's eternal quest for answers, for guidance, for a glimpse beyond the veil of the unknown. Even if the oracle's words were as ambiguous as a politician's promises, they spoke to a fundamental human desire to seek meaning beyond the mundane. In the end, Delphi was more than just a place. It was a symbol, a reflection of the human condition, where the divine and the everyday collided in a cacophony of incense-laden ambiguity. Its myths still echo today in every horoscope, every fortune cookie, every desperate plea for guidance in the face of uncertainty. Because let's face it, who among us hasn't wished for a little prophetic nudge now and then, even if it comes with a side of cryptic confusion? So, as we pause on the brink of Delphi's twilight, remember, the oracle may have fallen silent, but its stories continue to whisper through history, inviting us to ponder the mysteries of fate, destiny, and the eternal dance between humanity and the divine. And that, dear friends, is where we'll leave our tale for now, with more mysteries to uncover and more myths to unravel in the chapters ahead. Keep those laurel wreaths handy. We're not done with Delphi just yet. As we bid adieu to the oracle's ethereal whispers, let's pivot to the solid ground of archaeology, the present-day torchbearer of Delphi's legacy. It's easy to romanticize ancient ruins as serene relics, but the reality is more akin to a blockbuster excavation site, with archaeologists playing the unlikely heroes in dust-covered khakis. The story of Delphi didn't end with the last cryptic oracle. It was just waiting to be unearthed by modern trowels and brushes. Fast forward to the late 19th century, when the French archaeological school embarked on their own Olympian quest to unearth Delphi's secrets. This wasn't just a casual dig, it was a full-scale operation that would make Indiana Jones look like an amateur with a metal detector. By 1892 they had hit the Mother Lode, the Temple of Apollo, the Castalian Spring, and the Omphalos Stone were all revealed, like history's most tantalizing game of hide-and-seek. These finds weren't just about pretty columns and ancient bling. They offered real insight into the cultural and religious life of ancient Greece. The discoveries answered some questions, but raised countless others. For instance, those legendary vapors? Analysis of the site revealed the presence of ethylene gas, giving scientific backing to the tales of divine hallucinations. Suddenly, the Pythia's trance wasn't just mythological embellishment, but a geological reality. It was like finding out that the secret ingredient in Grandma's soup was a pinch of science all along. These archaeological endeavours also uncovered the Athenian treasury, a veritable Fort Knox of offerings that spoke volumes about the economic interplay at Delphi. The treasury wasn't just a vault of offerings. It was a political statement in stone and gold, a testament to Athens's power and piety, or perhaps their knack for PR. And let's not overlook the Siphnian treasury, an architectural gem funded by an island awash in silver from its mines. These structures weren't just storage spaces, they were ancient billboards, advertising wealth and influence in the Peloponnesian League of Nations. But let's pull back the curtain on the romanticized notion of Delphi as some pastoral Eden. The place was packed with political intrigue and economic maneuvering, as gritty as any Wall Street drama. The Amphictyonic League, which we've already met, wasn't just a benevolent protector of the sanctuary. They had their fingers in every pie, from temple upkeep to orchestrating sacred wars. It was less League of Nations and more House of Cards with divine overtones. Despite the politics and sometimes cutthroat economics, the allure of prophecy remains a perennial human fascination. Just look at modern pop culture. Delphi-inspired narratives pop up in everything from Percy Jackson novels to Assassin's Creed games, their mystique as potent as ever. Even our daily horoscopes and fortune cookies echo that ancient craving for guidance, albeit with a bit more sugar and a lot less ethylene. The legacy of Delphi is more than just stones and legends. It's a mirror reflecting our own desires and uncertainties. The oracle's cryptic words might have been as clear as the muddy waters of the Pleistos River, but they tapped into a universal human yearning for clarity in a chaotic world. This ancient hotline to the gods reminds us that, deep down, we're all seeking assurance in the face of the unknown. In the grand tapestry of history, Delphi stands out as a testament to the interplay between faith and fortune, myth and reality. It's a place where the lines between the divine and the mundane blur, where the sacred and the secular collide with spectacular results. Delphi's ruins may be silent now, but their stories continue to resonate, whispering through time to anyone willing to listen. So, as we close the book on Delphi, remember that its legacy is not just in the stones left behind, but in the enduring human quest for meaning and guidance. The oracle may have fallen silent, but its echoes remind us that the search for answers is as ancient as humanity itself. And as long as we have questions, the spirit of Delphi will never truly fade, nestled in the folds of history like a timeless enigma waiting to be rediscovered. The air is thick with the scent of dawn in 7th century Yucatan, where the sun isn't just a celestial body, but an impromptu rooster. Forget digital alarm clocks. Here, the calendar known as the Harb is calling the shots, and it's Weaver's Day, a day dedicated to the unsung artisans who spin tales with threads. Ah, the Mayans. They're not just about pyramids and chocolate, you know. They pretty much had a calendar for everything, and today you're diving into the bustling heart of a Mayan city. As you step into the marketplace, it's like a kaleidoscope exploded and decided to settle in one place. Textiles in every imaginable hue stretch out before you, each piece a tapestry of history and status. It's not just about fashion. These vibrant fabrics are currency. Yes, you heard right, money you can wear, and don't even think about haggling without knowing what you're doing. These threads are worth their weight in cacao beans, the other currency of choice back then. A simple wrap could cost you about 20 cacao beans, which might not sound like much, but hey, that's your caffeine fix for weeks. Now, let's talk economy. Weaving isn't just a hobby, it's the backbone of trade here. Textiles were exchanged far and wide, from the jungles of Central America to the highlands of what we now call Guatemala. Picture this. A piece of cloth made in Yucatan possibly ending up on the back of someone hundreds of miles away. And in a time when the wheel was more of a decorative concept than a practical invention, that's an impressive feat. You might be tempted to romanticize this vibrant scene, but hang on a second. Behind every beautiful textile is a marathon of labor. Mayan weavers, often women, spend days, sometimes weeks, on a single piece. And don't get any ideas about weaving being just a woman's job. Sure, women were the primary weavers, but men participated too, especially in the production of the more ceremonial garb. It was a family affair, and everyone had a part to play. But here's the kicker. Despite the labor-intensive process, these weavers were the economic powerhouses of their time. In a world without banks or stock markets, the loom was the key to financial independence and social standing. Talk about empowerment with a side of carpal tunnel. As you wander through the market, you might catch snippets of gossip about Lady Cable, a formidable queen from the Snake Kingdom, known for her strategic military mind and her impeccable taste in textiles. Her ability to use textiles as a statement of power was legendary. Forget Instagram influencers. Lady Cable was setting trends long before hashtags were a thing. So, what's the takeaway here? The Mayan marketplace is more than just a place to buy and sell. It's a living tapestry of culture and commerce. It's where economic policy meets everyday life, where a simple piece of cloth can tell you everything you need to know about who's who in the Mayan world. And as you navigate this vibrant maze, keep an eye out for the weavers, spinning their stories with every thread. They're the unsung architects of an economy that, believe it or not, still threads its way through history today. As you step away from the kaleidoscope that is the marketplace, the air is electric with the anticipation of creation. You find yourself drawn towards the rhythmic clatter of looms, a symphony of productivity that's the heartbeat of this vibrant society. Welcome to the weaving workshop, where every thread tells a story and every knot holds a secret. Here, the Mayan magic isn't just about pyramids or chocolate, but a meticulous tapestry where earth and artistry intertwine. First up, let's talk materials. You might think of cotton as a humble fabric choice, but back in the 7th century, it was the white gold of the Yucatan. Cotton was labor-intensive to harvest and spin, making it a luxury item. Then there's agave, the spiky underdog of the textile world. While you might know agave as the plant behind tequila, the Mayans were already onto its fibrous potential for weaving. Agave fibers were like the denim of their day, sturdy and reliable, perfect for the everyday hustle. But hold on to your hats, because the real superstar of Mayan textiles might just surprise you, the cochineal insect. Yep, you heard it right. This tiny bug, no bigger than a pinhead, was the secret to vibrant red dyes that painted the Mayan world with life. Cochineal dye was so valuable that it was worth more than its weight in gold in later centuries, but even in the Maya era it was a prized possession. The process of making dye from these insects was painstakingly slow. Think hundreds of bugs for a single ounce of dye, but the result was a crimson that could stop a jaguar in its tracks. Now, let's pull back the curtain on the weaving process itself. Picture this. A backstrap loom, a simple yet ingenious device that binds the weaver and the work in a dance of tension and release. The weaver, often a woman, attaches one end of the loom around her waist and the other to a stationary object, becoming quite literally tied to her craft. Each movement is a deliberate act of creation, a blend of muscle memory and artistic vision honed over years. This isn't some casual pastime, it's an all-consuming labor of love. Creating a single textile could take weeks, even months, depending on the complexity. The time and skill required are precisely why these textiles were so valuable, and why a single garment could communicate everything from social status to spiritual beliefs. It's like wearing a tweet that says, "I'm important, and here's why," in 2 OT threads or less. But let's not get swept away by the romance of it all. The reality is a bit more sobering. Weaving was hard, back-breaking work. The repetitive motions could lead to fatigue and physical strain. A small price to pay, some might argue, for wielding such economic power, but a price nonetheless. Despite the painstaking labor, these artisans were the economic engines of their society, spinning financial independence from each thread. As you soak in the atmosphere, don't be surprised if you hear whispers of Ix-Chel, the goddess of weaving, fertility, and medicine. In Mayan mythology, she's the divine muse for every weaver, a celestial patroness guiding their hands. Legend has it that Ix-Chel could weave the very fabric of the universe, her loom the axis of cosmic balance. It's a poetic image, but let's not kid ourselves. No goddess is going to help with the muscle cramps from hours bent over a loom. The myths and legends surrounding these weavers are as intricate as the textiles themselves, each tale adding layers of meaning to the craft. And while the idea of divine inspiration is alluring, the reality is far more human and grounded. The artistry comes not from mystical forces, but from generations of skill passed down through families, each thread a testament to human perseverance and ingenuity. So what's the big picture here? Mayan textiles were more than just clothing or currency. They were a living history, a social statement, and a testament to human creativity and resilience. The materials used, from cotton to agave to cochineal, reflect a deep understanding of and respect for the natural world. And the process, while labor-intensive, is a dance of discipline and devotion. As you leave the workshop, the clatter of looms still echoing in your mind, you can't help but marvel at the ingenuity and determination that defined this ancient world. It's a reminder that in every corner of history, where you find beauty, you'll also find hard work, innovation, and a dash of mythology. And as you prepare to dive into the next chapter of this vibrant civilization, remember, every thread you've seen today is part of a larger tapestry still unfolding across time. As you meander away from the rhythmic clatter of looms, the air around you thickens with a different kind of energy politics. You're stepping into the midday hustle of the upper crust of Maya society, where textiles are not just threads of cotton and agave, but threads of power and influence. Here, a length of cloth could be the key to opening doors that even the most persuasive rhetoric couldn't budge. It's Fashion Week, Yucatan style, where the stakes are as high as the temples lining the horizon. In this elite circle, textiles are the currency of diplomacy. Forget about coins or contracts. Here, a finely woven garment is the ultimate peace offering or declaration of allegiance. Imagine a world where gifting a tunic made from the rarest cochineal-dyed fabric could ease tensions between rival city-states or cement an alliance. It's like sending a diplomatic envoy wrapped in couture, and just like that, you see how weaving is intricately woven into the political fabric of the Maya world. Let's talk numbers. A textile could be worth hundreds, even thousands, of cacao beans, the Bitcoin of its day. And while you might think that's just pocket change, consider this. A single cacao bean was enough to buy you a turkey egg, while a dozen could get you a rabbit. So when a ruler receives a garment worth thousands of beans, it's akin to a king's ransom. It's not just about the cost, it's about the statement. Each piece is a sartorial signature that shouts status and influence louder than any herald. Now, let's unravel the connection between the rulers and the weavers. You might assume that the weavers, those unsung artisans, were just cogs in the machine, but the truth is far more complex. Weavers held a unique position in society, straddling the line between the common folk and the elite. Their craft made them indispensable. In a world where a ruler's wardrobe wasn't just about looking good, but about signaling power, weavers were the ultimate power brokers. They could make or break reputations with a flick of their shuttle, deciding which patterns graced the backs of the mighty. This relationship was symbiotic, albeit with a power imbalance. The rulers needed the weavers to craft their symbols of authority, while the weavers relied on the nobles for protection and resources. It was a delicate dance of mutual benefit and subtle exploitation. The rulers might have had the crowns, but the weavers held the threads of influence, and they knew how to pull them. You've probably heard the phrase, "clothes make the man." Well, in the Maya world, that was less a saying and more a modus operandi. Textile patterns and colors were laden with meaning, each design a coded message readable only by those in the know. It wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about communication. A geometric pattern might denote allegiance to a particular dynasty, while a specific color could signify a warrior's rank or a priest's divine favor. The garments were a walking billboard of identity and intent, their wearers draped in a layer of political armor as protective as any shield. But don't get too caught up in the romance of it all. The reality was that this system could be as stifling as it was empowering. For those outside the inner circle, the textiles they wore were not vehicles of self-expression, but uniforms that reinforced social hierarchies. In a society where what you wore could determine your place in the world, stepping out of line, textile-wise, wasn't just a fashion faux pas, it was a political statement, sometimes a dangerous one. As you mingle with the city's elite, you can't help but notice the whispers of intrigue that swirl as thick as the afternoon heat. Deals are brokered, alliances forged, all under the watchful eye of the ruling class. And while the men in power might hold court, don't underestimate the women. Maya queens were formidable forces, often using their wardrobes as a strategic tool. These women knew that a well-timed gift of a rare textile could sway opinions as effectively as any battle victory. Take Lady Cable, for example, the queen whose name you heard in the marketplace. Known for her shrewd political maneuvers and sharp military acumen, she wielded textiles like a weapon. A single garment from her could be a token of peace or a harbinger of war. It was a high-stakes game, one where the threads of fate were spun by the deft hands of weavers who understood the power they held, even if it was often in the shadows. As the sun climbed higher, you realized that in this world, textiles are more than just fabric, they're the warp and weft of society itself. They bind together the disparate threads of politics, economy, and identity into a tapestry as rich and complex as the jungle that surrounds you. And as you prepare to delve deeper into the intricate patterns of Maya life, remember that every piece of cloth you see is a page in a living history, still being written with every stitch and every loom. As the sun begins its descent, casting long shadows over the Yucatan, you find yourself drawn toward the pulsating heart of the community. It's time for the communal feast, a spectacle as colorful as the textiles that define this society. Here, in the flickering light of torches and the glow of the setting sun, the threads of daily life are woven together in a tapestry of celebration and social ritual. Now, if you're expecting to sit down to a quiet, polite dinner, think again. This is no ordinary potluck. It's a full-blown fiesta where the vibrancy of the textiles is matched only by the exuberance of the people wearing them. You see, these gatherings are more than just about satisfying hunger. They're a showcase for the artistry of weaving and a stage for the social dance of status and influence. As you take your seat, you're surrounded by a kaleidoscope of fabrics, each garment a statement of identity and rank. It's a scene that could give New York Fashion Week a run for its money, with each attendee draped in patterns that speak volumes about their place in the social hierarchy. Here, the air is thick with the aroma of maize and turkey, mingling with the subtle undertones of social maneuvering, because in a society as stratified as the Mayans, even a feast is a political arena. Let's talk food, because no feast is complete without it, and the Maya knew how to eat. Maize, the staple of their diet, is front and center, often ground into dough for tortillas that serve as the base of many meals. Add to that turkey, beans, and an array of fruits like papaya and avocado, and you've got a spread that would make even the most discerning foodie drool. But don't be fooled. It's not just about the taste. Every bite is a reminder of the agricultural prowess and trade networks that sustain this civilization. As you dig in, the feast transforms into a theatre of human connection, where storytelling is the main act. Picture this. Elders recount the legendary tales of gods and heroes, their voices rising and falling like the flames that light the gathering. These stories aren't just entertainment. They're the oral history that binds the community together, passing down lessons and values from one generation to the next. But before you wax lyrical about this harmonious gathering, let's pull back the curtain for a reality check. While the communal feast might seem like a utopia of shared resources and collective joy, the truth is a bit more tangled. Beneath the surface lies a complex web of social obligations and hierarchies, where status is both celebrated and contested. Take the dancers, for instance, who whirl and spin in a blur of color and rhythm. Their performances are not just for fun, but are deeply symbolic, reflecting social roles and community values. Yet, for all their grace and artistry, these dances are also a reminder of the rigid societal structures in place, a nod to the gods on one hand and a subtle reinforcement of the status quo on the other. And then there are the storytellers, the custodians of culture and history. While their tales captivate the audience, they also serve as a tool for social cohesion, subtly reinforcing the norms and values that keep the community intact. It's a delicate balance of myth and reality, where the power of narrative is wielded to shape perceptions and influence behavior. But perhaps the most telling aspect of this feast is the textiles themselves. They're not just draped on the attendees, they're celebrated in their own right, with prizes awarded for the most intricate designs and the finest craftsmanship. In a society where textiles are currency, this is as much an economic forum as it is a social gathering. Yet, while the celebration of textiles is real, so too are the tensions lurking beneath the surface. The very fabrics that unite the community also serve as reminders of the economic dependencies that bind them. Weavers, while celebrated for their skill, are caught in a cycle of production that dictates their livelihoods. Their artistry is both a source of pride and a reminder of the relentless demand for their wares, a demand that drives the economy but also ties them to their looms. So, as you enjoy the feast and the spectacle, remember that this isn't just a celebration of community, it's a microcosm of the society itself. It's a world where the threads of culture, economy, and politics are interwoven in a complex tapestry that both unites and divides. Where the romance of the communal feast is tempered by the realities of social hierarchy and economic necessity. As the evening wears on and the last embers of the fire flicker against the night sky, you're left with a sense of the intricate dance that defines Mayan life. A dance where textiles are not just garments but symbols, where stories are not just entertainment but history, and where the feast is not just a meal but a reflection of the world itself. And as you prepare to leave this vibrant gathering, the echoes of laughter and music still ringing in your ears, you're reminded that in the world of the Mayans, every thread has its place, every story its purpose. The tapestry of life here is as rich and complex as the jungle that envelops it, a testament to the resilience and creativity of a civilization that continues to captivate us, threads and all. As the last embers flicker against the tapestry of night, you're left standing under a canopy of stars that have borne witness to centuries of stories woven into the very fabric of Mayan life. Here, in the solemn stillness, The day's vibrant chaos settles into a reflective calm. It's a moment to ponder the threads that connect this ancient civilization, not just to itself, but to the world as we know it today. Let's unravel this, shall we? First, consider the economics. Earlier, you witnessed how Mayan weavers transformed raw materials into vibrant textiles that fueled an economy as complex as their intricate patterns. Imagine a world where a single textile could tip the scales of trade. It's not just about cloth, but capital. Weaving wasn't a mere craft, it was the economic engine, the Bitcoin of its time, with textiles traded across regions as far apart as Yucatan and modern-day Honduras. We're talking about a supply chain that would make even the most seasoned Wall Street trader raise an eyebrow. And what about politics? You saw firsthand how these threads were spun into the political fabric of the Maya. Textiles weren't just garments, they were declarations of power, allegiances woven into every stitch. The rulers knew their wardrobes could speak louder than their words, and they wielded them accordingly. In a world without press releases or Twitter, a well-placed tunic could announce alliances, broker peace, or even spark a war. It's not too far off from how we use social media today, where a single post can become a diplomatic tool or a weapon. Socially, the weaver's loom was a microcosm of Mayan society itself. As you wandered through the market, you glimpsed a world where every thread held a story, every pattern a piece of identity. Textiles were the great equalizer, a universal language that spoke of status and identity in a way that transcended spoken word. But let's not romanticize it too much. These were also the chains that bound people to their societal roles. The artistry of the weaver was both celebrated and constrained by the rigid hierarchies that defined their world. And then there's the spiritual dimension. In a society where gods and myths wove through everyday life, as seamlessly as the threads on a loom, weaving held a sacred place. The goddess Ixchel, with her celestial loom, was the divine patroness of this art, and her mythos infused the craft with spiritual significance. The Mayans believed that each woven piece was more than fabric. It was a tapestry of existence, connecting the earthly with the divine. Yet, the reality was more grounded. While myths lent inspiration, it was human hands that bore the strain of creation, often unacknowledged by history's grand narratives. So, what does this all mean for us today? Well, let's spin it forward. The Mayan weavers, in all their complexity, teach us about the power of art as a vehicle for economic, political, and social expression. They remind us that the stories we weave today, through the clothes we wear, the words we share, the digital threads we spin, are echoes of ancient practices. We may not sit at looms, but we craft narratives with every tweet, every TikTok, every fashion choice, and every act of creation. And just like the Mayans, we too spin myths. Our modern world is wrapped in them, from the idea of the self-made entrepreneur to the myth of the infallible leader. We weave stories around success, power, and identity, often ignoring the complex threads of reality that underpin them. The Mayan weavers, with their deft hands and unyielding resilience, challenge us to look beyond the surface, to question the narratives we accept and the myths we perpetuate. As you stand under the vast cosmos, a silent witness to the stories of the past and the stories yet to be told, you realize that the threads of history are never truly severed. They stretch across time, connecting us to our ancestors, to their triumphs and trials, and to the enduring lessons they left behind. The Mayan weavers, with their intricate patterns and vibrant hues, remind us that history is not just a tapestry of the past, but a living, breathing fabric that continues to shape our world. So, as you take one last glance at the starlit sky, remember that every thread has its place in the loom of time. Each story, each myth, each reality is part of a larger tapestry still unfolding. And in this grand design, we are all weavers, spinning the threads of our lives into the fabric of history, one stitch at a time.